Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Robert Johnson, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Theodore Roosevelt National Park, North Dakota, during what was supposed to be a restorative winter camping trip after my divorce. The snow had been falling for 3 days when I reached the entrance to the north unit of the park. The ranger station was closed, not unusual for this time of year, but I'd secured my backcountry permit online weeks ago. I left my registration details in the Dropbox and checked the trail map one last time. The Achenbach Trail would take me deep into the Badlands away from any hint of civilization. Exactly what I needed. My therapist had encouraged this trip, said I needed to process everything that had happened with Karen. 3 years of marriage dissolved in a heartbeat when I found those messages on her phone. The betrayal still felt like a physical wound. Out here, I could finally clear my head. The solitude hit me immediately as I shouldered my pack. No cell service, no people, just the whisper of snow falling through bare cottonwood branches and the crunch of my boots breaking trail. I welcomed it. 4 hours in, the weather took a turn. What had been gentle snowfall became a driving wall of white. The temperature plummeted, and the wind howled through the twisted juniper trees that dotted the rugged landscape. I checked my GPS, still 8 miles from my intended campsite at Oxbow Overlook. I needed shelter, and fast. That's when I spotted the cabin. It shouldn't have been there. I'd studied the park maps obsessively for weeks, and there were no structures marked in this section. Yet there it stood, a small log structure nestled against the base of a sandstone butte, smoke curling from a metal chimney. I hesitated only briefly. The alternative was potential hypothermia. I trudged toward the cabin, my boots sinking nearly to my knees in fresh powder. The door creaked open before I even knocked. A man stood there, tall and gaunt with a gray beard reaching nearly to his chest. His eyes were the palest blue I'd ever seen, almost colorless, and they regarded me with neither welcome nor hostility. "Storm caught you," he said. Not a question. "Yes, sir," I replied, stamping snow from my boots. "Robert Johnson. I was heading to Oxbow, but—" "Can't make Oxbow in this," he interrupted, stepping aside. "Come on, then." The cabin's interior was Spartan but warm. A wood stove radiated heat from one corner. A small table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with preserved foods and old books. A narrow bed pushed against the far wall. Animal pelts, coyote, rabbit, and others I couldn't identify, hung from pegs. The place smelled of wood smoke, leather, and something else I couldn't place, something musky and organic. "Walter Blackwood," the man said, moving to stir something in a pot that hung over the stove. "Been out here 30 years, come March." "I didn't realize anyone lived in the park," I said, removing my gloves. Walter just grunted. "Bowl?" He held up a chipped enamel dish. I nodded gratefully. The stew was rich and gamey. Venison, I assumed, though the flavor was stronger than any deer I'd eaten before. I was too hungry to care. "What brings a man out solo in February?" Walter asked after I'd eaten half the bowl. I gave him the abbreviated version. The divorce, the need to clear my head, the urge to test myself against something real, not the artificial challenges of my IT job in Minneapolis. Walter nodded as if he understood perfectly. "The Badlands have a way of telling you who you really are," he said. "Strip away all the noise. Leave just the man." Something in his tone made me uneasy, but I chalked it up to his obvious years of isolation. We talked little after that. I offered to use my supplies, but Walter waved me off. Later, he pointed to a small cot near the stove. "You'll sleep there. Storm's not passing tonight." Despite my exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. Strange dreams plagued me, dreams of running through snow-covered ravines, pursued by something I couldn't see but could feel watching me, Dreams where my fingers elongated into claws and my breath clouded the air in great, hungry plumes. I woke suddenly in the darkest part of night. The fire had died down to embers, casting the cabin in deep shadows. Walter's bed was empty. A scratching sound came from outside like antlers against wood. Then, a sound that wasn't quite human, a cross between a howl and a word, drawn out long and mournful. I froze, fully awake now. The noise came again, closer to the door. The latch moved. I feigned sleep as the door swung open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the metallic scent of fresh snow and something else. The same musky odor I'd noticed earlier, but stronger now. Wilder. Through slitted eyes, I watched a figure enter. It moved with Walter's gait, but seemed wrong somehow. Too tall, too angular. The embers gave just enough light to see its silhouette. The shoulders hunched and massive, the head crowned with something that branched like antlers. It moved to the stove, added wood. As flames caught and grew, I glimpsed its face in profile. It was Walter, and yet not Walter. His features seemed stretched, elongated. His teeth, visible as he opened his mouth to exhale, appeared unnaturally sharp. The antlers I'd thought I'd seen were merely shadows cast by his outstretched fingers, which looked too long, the joints too numerous. I must still be dreaming, I thought desperately, but the cold air on my face felt too real. Walter, or whatever it was, turned toward my cot. I shut my eyes completely, heart hammering in my chest. I heard it breathing, smelled that wild musk growing stronger. "I know you're awake, Robert Johnson," Walter's voice said, though it sounded rougher, as if something else spoke through him. "I can hear your heart." I opened my eyes. Walter stood over me, looking human again. Or almost. His pale eyes reflected the firelight like an animal's. "What are you?" I whispered. "Just a man," he replied. "Most of the time." "And other times?" Walter smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too many, too sharp. "The Dakota have stories about these badlands, about men who hunger too deeply, about the Wendigo." My blood turned to ice. I'd read about the Wendigo in a book of Native American folklore, a malevolent spirit that possessed humans, created by and creating insatiable hunger, cannibalism, winter madness. "You're saying you're possessed by a Wendigo spirit?" My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Walter sat heavily in a chair that creaked under his weight. "Possessed? No. Becoming? Maybe." He stared into the fire. 30 years alone changes a man. Hunger changes him more. I thought of the stew I'd eaten. My stomach lurched. "Don't worry," Walter said, reading my expression. "Just deer. Tonight." The implication of tonight hung in the air between us. "The storm will pass by morning," he continued. "You should go then. Go back to your world of noise and people." His pale eyes fixed on me. Some solitudes are too deep for men to bear. They fill with other things. I barely slept after that. I kept my hunting knife in hand beneath my blanket, eyes fixed on Walter, who sat motionless by the fire for hours before finally returning to his bed. Dawn broke clear and blindingly bright. The storm had passed, leaving a pristine blanket of snow across the Badlands. Walter was already up, frying something in a cast-iron pan. "Eat," he said, sliding a plate of food toward me. "Long walk today." I hesitated. "It's just bacon," he said, not looking at me. "From my stores." I ate quickly, aware of Walter watching me. When I finished, I packed my gear in silence. At the door, I paused. "Why did you tell me? About what you're becoming?" Walter's colorless eyes seemed to look through me rather than at me. "Winter's long. I get lonely. And sometimes—" He trailed off, then shrugged. "Sometimes I need to remember what it was to be just a man." I nodded, unsure what to say. "Thank you for the shelter." "Head east to the river, then follow it south," Walter said. Don't come back to this part of the Badlands." I hiked out fast, pushing myself harder than was wise in the deep snow. By late afternoon, I'd reached Caprock Coulee, where the trail became easier to follow. I made camp there, building a larger fire than necessary, keeping my knife close. That night I heard it again, that same not quite human howl, distant but clear in the still, cold air. I told myself it was just a wolf. In the morning, fresh tracks surrounded my camp. Not wolf, not human, something in between, with elongated toe marks and deep impressions as if made by something unnaturally heavy. The tracks circled my camp exactly once before heading back north toward the heart of the Badlands. I hiked out that day, abandoning my planned route. When I reached the ranger station, I reported finding an illegal squatter in the park. I described Walter and the approximate location of his cabin. The ranger looked confused. "There's no cabin in that area, sir," she said, "and no one named Walter Blackwood with a permit." "I stayed there," I insisted. "He gave me shelter during the storm." The ranger pulled out a map, asked me to show her the location. When I pointed to it, she frowned. "That's Whitetail Butte," she said. "There was a trapper's cabin there over 100 years ago. Man named Walker Black lived there in the 1880s. Story goes he got snowed in one winter, ran out of food. They found him in spring." She hesitated. What was left of him, and what was left of his visitors? A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the winter air. "There's a cabin there now," I said. "I slept in it." The ranger studied my face. I could see she didn't believe me. Thought perhaps I'd gotten disoriented in the storm. I didn't press the issue. What could I say? That I'd shared a meal with something not quite human? That I'd witnessed a man's transformation into a creature of Native American legend? I checked into a motel in Watford City that night. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, I examined myself in the bathroom mirror. My face looked gaunt, my eyes bloodshot from 2 nights of little sleep. As I leaned closer, I noticed something odd about my teeth. Had my canines always been that sharp? And deep in my gut, I felt something I hadn't noticed before, a hunger that the motel vending machine snacks couldn't touch, a craving for something richer, more primal. I told myself it was just the stress of the experience, the lingering fear playing tricks on my mind. I would drive back to Minneapolis tomorrow, see my therapist, rejoin the world of noise and people, as Walter had put it. But that night I dreamed again of running through the snow-covered Badlands. Only this time, I wasn't being chased. I was the one hunting. When I woke, my sheets were torn by hands that had clutched too hard, nails that had grown too sharp. On my phone, I pulled up the map of Theodore Roosevelt National Park, finding myself drawn to the unmarked area around Whitetail Butte. Something called to me from those desolate Badlands. Something hungry. I checked out of the motel that morning, but I didn't drive east toward Minneapolis. I drove north, back toward the park, back toward Walter, back toward what I was beginning to understand, with equal parts terror and strange elation, that I was becoming. Winter is long in North Dakota. The hunger is longer still, and I am no longer just Robert Johnson. But if you find yourself lost in the North Unit, in the shadow of Whitetail Butte, you might see our cabin, smoke curling from the chimney, the promise of warmth and shelter. We might even invite you in. We get so lonely in winter, and so very, very hungry. My name is Daniel Lopez, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Turtle Mountains of North Dakota, just 3 miles south of Lake Metigosha State Park. The wind carries different sounds in the wilderness. That's what I keep telling myself as I huddle inside my tent, waiting for dawn to break through the oppressive darkness of the Turtle Mountains. My breath forms small clouds in the frigid air despite it being late spring. My fingers tremble as I write this by flashlight, not from the cold, but from what I've witnessed over the past 3 days. I never should have come here alone. 2 weeks ago, my therapist suggested I needed to reconnect with myself. After my divorce from Elena last year, I'd buried myself in work at the architectural firm, barely sleeping, hardly eating. "You need solitude," Dr. Harrison had said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Somewhere without distractions. Just you and nature." The Turtle Mountains seemed perfect, a hidden gem of rolling hills and dense forests along the Canadian border, far from Minneapolis and the life I was trying to escape. I'd read about the unique ecosystem there, an island of forest surrounded by prairie, filled with aspen, oak, and the stately pines that give this particular camping area its name. I packed light: a one-person tent, sleeping bag, portable stove, water filter, a week's worth of freeze-dried meals, my journal, and my father's old hunting knife. I wasn't planning to hunt, but something about having his knife made me feel like he was watching over me. Dad had been an avid outdoorsman before cancer took him 5 years ago. He would have approved of this journey. The 6-hour drive north from Minneapolis was uneventful. I stopped only once for gas in Fargo, where the attendant, an older man with deep creases around his eyes, looked at me strangely when I mentioned my destination. "Hollow Pines?" he asked, handing back my credit card. "Don't hear many folks heading up that way anymore." "Is it not a good spot?" I asked. He shrugged, his weathered face unreadable. "Just stories. Old legends, you know. Natives called it the place where shadows walk. Probably nothing." I thanked him and left, dismissing his cryptic warning as small-town folklore meant to unnerve city tourists. Now, 3 days later, I understand exactly what he meant. The first day was perfection. I arrived around noon, parked at the small deserted lot near the trailhead, and hiked the 3 miles to the first campsite. The trail wound through dense forest, occasionally opening to reveal stunning vistas of rolling hills stretching toward the horizon. Spring wildflowers dotted the forest floor, white trilliums, purple violets, and delicate ladies' slippers. The air smelled of pine sap and damp earth. I chose a spot near a small clearing, where a tiny stream bubbled over moss-covered rocks. Perfect for filtering water. I set up camp efficiently, muscle memory taking over from the camping trips of my youth. By mid-afternoon, I had my tent secured, firewood collected, and dinner cooking on my portable stove. That first night, I sat by my small fire, watching sparks rise toward the star-filled sky, feeling more peace than I had in months. The divorce papers, the empty apartment, the pitying looks from colleagues, all of it seemed to belong to another life. Here, there was only the crackling fire, the chorus of spring peepers from a nearby pond, and the occasional hoot of an owl. I slept deeply that night, dreamlessly, waking only once when a twig snapped somewhere in the darkness. Probably a deer, I thought, before drifting back to sleep. The second day, I explored the area, following the stream upstream to a series of small waterfalls cascading over ancient volcanic rock. I took photographs, sketched in my journal, and even attempted to fish, though I caught nothing. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, I made my way back to camp, planning the hike I would take the following day to Lake Metigauche. That's when I first noticed something was wrong. My tent looked different. Not dramatically so, but enough that I paused at the edge of the clearing. It seemed to be at a slightly different angle than I had left it. Inside, my sleeping bag was unzipped, though I distinctly remembered zipping it up that morning. My backpack, which I had left leaning against the tent's inner wall, now lay flat on the ground, though nothing appeared to be missing. Wildlife, I reasoned. A curious raccoon or squirrel had somehow gotten inside. I carefully checked the tent for tears or holes, but found none. The zipper had been opened. Animals can be clever, I told myself, ignoring the prickle of unease traveling up my spine. I rebuilt my fire and cooked dinner, but the peaceful feeling from the previous evening had evaporated. The forest sounds seemed different, muted, as if the woods were holding its breath. No frogs sang from the pond. No owls called. Even the breeze had died, leaving an unnatural stillness. As darkness fell completely, I became convinced I was being watched. Every few minutes I would turn suddenly, expecting to catch someone, or something, lurking at the edge of my firelight. But there was never anything there, just the silent, dark wall of trees surrounding my small camp. Around midnight, I finally retreated to my tent, exhausted from the constant vigilance. I zipped myself securely inside, keeping my father's knife close beside my sleeping bag. Despite my unease, fatigue eventually won, and I fell into a fitful sleep filled with strange dreams. I dreamed of walking through the forest at night, following a pale figure that always remained just ahead, partially obscured by trees. In the dream, I knew with certainty that I needed to catch up, that the figure had something important to tell me. But no matter how fast I moved, the distance between us remained constant. Then the figure stopped and slowly turned. I caught a glimpse of a gaunt face, skin stretched too tight over sharp bones, eyes like dark holes in a pale mask. The mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth, and from it came not a scream, but a sound like dry leaves rustling across pavement. I woke with a gasp, drenched in cold sweat despite the chill air. Outside my tent, something moved. Soft footsteps circled my campsite, too deliberate for an animal, too light for a human. I lay frozen, straining to hear over the thunder of my heartbeat. The footsteps stopped directly outside my tent. I could see the shadow of something vaguely human-shaped, silhouetted against the tent wall by the moonlight. It stood motionless for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, slowly, it crouched down. I watched in silent horror as the zipper of my tent began to rise, inch by excruciating inch. I lunged for my flashlight and knife simultaneously. The light beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing. The tent flap hung open, revealing only the empty clearing beyond. Whatever had been there was gone, or perhaps had never been there at all. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat clutching my knife, flashlight trained on the tent opening until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the trees. Only then did I venture outside, half expecting to find footprints or some other evidence of my nighttime visitor. The ground around my tent was undisturbed. No tracks, no broken twigs, nothing to suggest anything had circled my camp in the darkness. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by doubt. Had I dreamed the entire incident? Was the stress and isolation already affecting my mind? As I prepared a simple breakfast of instant oatmeal and coffee, I decided to stick to my original plan. I would hike to Lake Metagoche as intended. The exercise and change of scenery would do me good, help clear my head of nocturnal paranoia. The trail to the lake was well marked but clearly seldom used. In places, young saplings grew across the path, and I had to push through undergrowth that had begun to reclaim the trail. The forest felt different in this direction, older somehow. The trees grew closer together, their branches creating a canopy so dense that little sunlight penetrated to the forest floor. Few birds sang here. The only sound was my own labored breathing as I climbed steadily upward. After about 2 hours of hiking, I reached a ridge overlooking what should have been Lake Metagoche. Instead, I found myself staring down at a vast, circular depression in the land. A perfectly round valley perhaps half a mile across, ringed by steep hills. At the center stood a single enormous pine tree, its massive trunk dwarfing the surrounding forest, its top disappearing into low-hanging clouds. I checked my map, then my GPS. According to both, I should be at the lake's southern shore, but there was no lake, only this strange, perfect valley with its sentinel tree. My GPS signal flickered, then died completely. The map showed features that didn't match the landscape before me. Something was very wrong. Curiosity overcame caution. I decided to descend into the valley for a closer look at the massive tree. The slope was steeper than it had appeared from above, and I had to pick my way carefully down the hillside, using saplings and exposed roots as handholds. As I neared the bottom of the valley, the air grew noticeably colder. My breath fogged before me despite the spring temperature. The ground beneath my feet changed from forest loam to a spongy moss that seemed to absorb all sound. I could no longer hear my own footsteps as I approached the enormous pine. Up close, the tree was even more impressive and unsettling. Its trunk must have been at least 15 feet in diameter, the bark deeply furrowed with age. No branches grew from the lower 60 feet or so. They began far above my head, creating a dark canopy that blocked out the sky. Most disturbing were the markings carved into the bark at eye level. Crude, angular symbols that looked ancient, their edges softened by time but still clearly deliberate. I reached out to touch one of the carvings, tracing its outline with my fingertip. The bark felt unnaturally cold beneath my hand. As my finger completed the symbol's pattern, a deep vibration passed through the tree, through my hand, up my arm and into my chest, where it resonated painfully against my ribs. I stumbled backward, suddenly lightheaded. The ground seemed to shift beneath me, and for a moment I thought I saw the massive tree move. Not sway as in a breeze, but move, as if it had slightly turned, like a person turning their head to watch something. Then I noticed the silence. Complete, absolute silence. No wind in the branches, no distant bird calls, not even the sound of my own pulse in my ears. It was as if I had suddenly gone deaf, or as if sound itself had been sucked from the world around me. In that terrible silence, I heard it. A voice, not so much heard with my ears as felt within my mind, dry and ancient, like the rustling of dead leaves. Daniel. My name. It knew my name. You shouldn't have come back, Daniel. Back? I had never been here before. Had I? Images flashed through my mind, fragmented memories that didn't belong to me. Children playing in this valley when it held a lake. A ritual around the great tree. Dark shapes moving beneath the water's surface. Screaming. Blood on the moss. The lake draining away overnight, leaving nothing but damp ground and silence. You were the only one who escaped, Daniel. But now you've returned, and it's hungry again. My vision swam. The massive tree seemed to pulse before me, its bark rippling like the surface of disturbed water. From deep within its trunk came a sound like grinding stone, or teeth. Self-preservation finally overcame paralysis. I ran, scrambling up the steep slope, slipping on loose soil, tearing my hands on rocks and roots. I climbed with the desperate strength of absolute terror. Behind me, I heard movement, a sound like a massive object dragging itself across the ground, branches cracking, earth shifting. I didn't look back, not when something brushed against my ankle, not when a hot, moist breath touched the back of my neck, not when a voice that was no longer in my head but terrifyingly real whispered my name again, this time with something like hunger. I reached the ridge and kept running, no longer following the trail, simply putting as much distance as possible between myself and that accursed valley. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, collapsing into a gasping heap in a small meadow surrounded by normal, unthreatening aspen trees. As my panic subsided, rationality began to reassert itself. Clearly, I had become disoriented, had taken a wrong turn somewhere. The valley wasn't on any map because it was simply an unremarkable depression in the landscape, not the site of Lake Metigauche at all. The tree was just a tree. Ancient and impressive, certainly, but just a tree. The voice, the memories, the sense of being pursued, all hallucinations brought on by exhaustion, isolation, and lingering psychological stress from my divorce. I had experienced some kind of panic attack, nothing more. The rational explanation comforted me as I slowly recovered my breath and my senses. I checked my GPS again. It was working now, showing me about a mile west of where I should have been. Once I had regained my strength, I would simply make my way back to camp, pack up my things, and leave this place. Clearly, I wasn't ready for solo wilderness experiences yet. The sun was already low in the sky by the time I found my way back to my campsite. Relief flooded through me at the sight of my small tent, still standing just as I had left it that morning. Everything was normal. Everything was fine, except that my tent was unzipped again. And this time, there was no question of wildlife or forgetfulness. The opening gaped wide, the interior clearly visible in the fading light. Sitting cross-legged in the center of my tent was a woman. At first glance, she appeared to be in her 30s, with long dark hair that fell across her face. She wore what looked like a nightgown, simple and white, though it was stained with dirt and what might have been dried blood. Her head was bowed, face hidden behind the curtain of hair, hands folded neatly in her lap. "Hello." My voice sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet clearing. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" The woman didn't respond, didn't move. For a horrible moment, I wondered if she was dead, propped up in some macabre display. Then I saw her shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath. "Look, if you need help, I have a first aid kit, or we can try to call someone, though cell reception is pretty bad out here." I took a tentative step closer. The woman's head snapped up with an audible crack of vertebrae, hair parting to reveal her face. I nearly screamed. Her skin was deathly pale, stretched too tight across sharp cheekbones. Her eyes were solid black, no whites, no iris, just depthless pools of darkness. But it was her mouth that froze the blood in my veins, lipless and too wide, stretching nearly ear to ear in a grotesque parody of a smile, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. It was the face from my dream. "Daniel," she said, her voice like dry leaves scraping across pavement. The same voice I had heard by the tree. "It's been waiting for you to come back." I stumbled backward, nearly falling. "Who are you? What do you want?" She tilted her head at an impossible angle, neck bent as if broken. "You don't remember me, Daniel. I'm hurt." Her smile widened impossibly further. "But then, you were so young when you got away, the only one who did. Until you came back, of course." "I've never been here before," I insisted, though a cold doubt was forming in my gut. "Not as the man called Daniel Lopez," she agreed. "But before that, before your parents adopted you, when you were just a frightened little boy named Tommy Wright." The name hit me like a physical blow. Tommy. No one had called me that in 25 years, not since before the adoption. How could she possibly know? "You were 6 years old," she continued, still smiling that terrible smile, "on a camping trip with your birth family, your father, your mother, your little sister Emily. Do you remember what happened to them, Tommy?" Images flashed through my mind, fragmented, distorted, like viewing old photographs through murky water. A family I barely remembered, a camping trip, a massive tree by a lake, Dad telling me to stay in the tent no matter what I heard. Mom's screams in the darkness. Running through the forest, small legs pumping, lungs burning, something massive crashing through the trees behind me. "No," I whispered, backing away. "That's not possible. My birth family died in a car accident." "Is that what they told you?" The woman unfolded herself and stood in one fluid, unnatural motion. Such a convenient story, so much easier to accept than the truth. She took a step toward me, moving with a jerky, uncoordinated gait as if her limbs were being controlled by something that didn't quite understand how human bodies worked. "Stay back," I warned, fumbling for my father's hunting knife. "He's not your father," she hissed, nodding toward the knife. "Your real father fed the hollow pine with his blood, just like your mother, just like little Emily, just like I did when I came looking for the missing Wright family all those years ago." She took another lurching step forward. "I was a park ranger, you know. Caroline Bell. I found your abandoned campsite, found the trail of blood leading to the hollow pine, saw things no human should see. And then I became part of it. My back hit a tree trunk. I could retreat no further. The thing that had once been Caroline Bell advanced, her movements becoming more fluid, more predatory with each step. The hollow pine has been waiting for you, Tommy. The last of the right blood. It gets so hungry in the years between feedings. She was close enough now that I could smell her, a nauseating combination of rotting vegetation and stagnant water. Her black eyes reflected no light, seeming to absorb it instead. Two holes in reality through which something ancient and malevolent observed me. "You're not real," I said desperately. "This is a hallucination, a nightmare." Caroline's grotesque smile widened still further, her jaw dislocating to accommodate the movement. Oh, Tommy, if only that were true. She lunged, impossibly fast, impossibly strong. I slashed wildly with the knife, feeling it connect with something that wasn't quite flesh, hearing a sound like tearing canvas. Black ichor sprayed across my face, burning like acid wherever it touched bare skin. Caroline shrieked, the sound so high-pitched and inhuman that I felt something rupture in my right eardrum. Blood trickled warm down my neck as I stumbled away, still clutching the knife. The wound I had inflicted, a deep gash across her torso, didn't bleed red. Instead, a thick black substance oozed out, moving with a life of its own, forming tendrils that reached toward the ground. Where they touched, the spring vegetation withered and blackened. "That wasn't very nice." "Tommy," Caroline said, her voice distorting, deepening, becoming less human with each word. "Now, we'll have to do this the hard way." Her body began to change, limbs elongating, joints bending in impossible directions. Her nightgown tore as her torso stretched and twisted. Her face melted and reformed, features shifting like clay in invisible hands until it no longer resembled anything human. I ran. Behind me, something crashed through the underbrush, something much larger than the woman Caroline had appeared to be. Trees snapped. The ground shook with impacts that could only be made by something massive moving at terrible speed. I had no destination, no plan beyond escape. My lungs burned. The knife, still clutched in my right hand, felt impossibly heavy. In the gathering darkness, I stumbled over roots and rocks, each fall costing precious seconds, each rise to my feet more difficult than the last. Then, through the trees ahead, I saw it. The circular valley, the hollow pine. Somehow, no matter which direction I ran, I was being herded back to that place. I changed course, veering sharply left, away from the valley. A massive shape burst from the trees to my right, a writhing mass of darkness, vaguely humanoid but wrong in every proportion. I caught glimpses of too many limbs, of a face that kept reforming itself, of a maw filled with hundreds of needle teeth. It cut off my escape, driving me back toward the valley. I tried another direction, and again, the thing appeared, blocking my path. No matter which way I turned, it was there, always pushing me toward the hollow pine. As I broke through the tree line at the top of the ridge surrounding the valley, the thing that had been Caroline Bell materialized directly before me. Its form had stabilized somewhat, though it remained a nightmarish amalgamation of human and something else, something that had never walked on this earth in its true form. "The hollow pine is waiting, Tommy," it said, its voice now a chorus of dozens of different tones speaking in unison. "It's been so patient. 25 years of patience." I slashed at it with the knife, but this time it was ready. A limb like a twisted branch caught my wrist, nearly crushing the bones. Another wrapped around my throat, cutting off my air. "Your family was so disappointed when you got away," the thing said, its face rippling, reforming into a grotesque approximation of what might have been my birth father's features. "They've been calling for you. Listen." From the valley below, carried on a wind that shouldn't exist, came voices. A woman's voice, sweet and loving. "Tommy, come home." A man's deeper tones. "Son, we've missed you." And worst of all, a child's high, clear call. "Tommy, come play with me." Tears blurred my vision. I knew those voices weren't real. couldn't be real. And yet, some part of me, the abandoned 6-year-old who had never properly grieved his first family, longed to answer their call. The creature sensed my momentary weakness. Its grip loosened slightly. "That's right, Tommy. They're waiting for you. All you have to do is go to the tree. Touch it. Let it remember you. Let it take you home to them." My oxygen-deprived brain was beginning to short-circuit. The voices seemed more real, more present. I could almost see them standing by the massive tree. Mom, Dad, little Emily, all smiling up at me, arms outstretched. Daniel. A different voice, stronger, real. "Daniel, this isn't real. Fight it." My adoptive father's voice. The man who had raised me, loved me, taught me everything from tying my shoes to driving a car to defending myself, including how to use a knife. With the last of my strength, I twisted my wrist against the creature's grip, not pulling away, but pushing in, driving the blade deep into what passed for its flesh. Again, the black ichor sprayed, but this time I was ready, closing my eyes against it, turning my face away. The creature's grip loosened as it howled in pain and rage. I dropped to the ground, gasping for air, then scrambled backward, putting distance between us. The thing thrashed, multiple limbs clutching at the knife still embedded in its torso. Each movement seemed to cause it further pain, black ichor pouring from the wound. "You'll pay for that, Tommy Wright," it snarled, its face shifting rapidly between Caroline Bell, my birth father, and something utterly inhuman. The hollow pine doesn't like its meals to fight back. It lunged for me again, but its movements were slower now, less coordinated. The black substance leaking from its wound seemed to be weakening it. I dodged, rolling to the side, then jumped to my feet and ran, not down into the valley, but along the ridge, circling around. The creature pursued, but I had the advantage now. Whatever my father's knife had done to it was taking a toll. Its movements became increasingly erratic, its form less stable, sometimes almost dissolving into a shapeless mass before reforming. I reached the far side of the valley and began to climb the steep outer slope of the ridge. Behind me, the creature's pursuit was slowing, its howls of rage giving way to sounds of pain and, strangely, fear. At the top of the ridge, I paused, looking back. The creature had stopped at the edge of the forest, seemingly unwilling or unable to leave the boundary of the valley. It writhed and pulsed, its form becoming less distinct by the second. Then, with a final shriek that echoed across the valley, it collapsed, melting into the ground like black wax. For a long moment, there was absolute silence. Then, from deep within the valley, from the vicinity of the hollow pine, came a sound like an enormous bellows, a great inhalation of rage and hunger denied. I didn't wait to hear more. I ran. The forest that had seemed so confusing before now opened clear paths before me. It was as if, having escaped the influence of the hollow pine, nature itself was aiding my flight. My GPS worked again, guiding me back toward the main trail and eventually to my campsite. I should have kept going straight to my car, but I needed my keys, my wallet, the essentials I had left at camp. I approached the clearing cautiously, half expecting to find Caroline Bell sitting in my tent again. The campsite was undisturbed. My tent stood as I had left it that morning, zipped closed. My backpack leaned against a tree where I had left it before my hike. Everything appeared normal. I quickly gathered the bare necessities: car keys, wallet, phone, water bottle. The rest I abandoned. Let the forest have it. I wanted nothing that had spent the night in this accursed place. The 3-mile hike back to the parking lot was the longest of my life. Every shadow held potential threats. Every sound sent spikes of adrenaline through my system. Twice I thought I glimpsed pale figures moving parallel to my path, always just at the edge of vision, disappearing when I turned to look directly. But nothing attacked. Nothing pursued. And finally, gloriously, I emerged from the forest to see my car sitting alone in the small gravel lot, exactly as I had left it. I'm writing this from a motel in Botino, the nearest town with accommodation. I haven't slept. Can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see the hollow pine. I hear Caroline Bell's voice. I see my birth family beckoning to me from beneath its massive branches. Tomorrow, I'll drive back to Minneapolis and try to forget. But tonight, I needed to record what happened while it's still fresh, still real. Because already I can feel my rational mind trying to rewrite the experience, to categorize it as stress, hallucination, bad mushrooms in my freeze-dried stroganoff. But I know what I saw, what I felt, what almost took me. And I know now why I was sent to foster care with no records, no history, no explanation of what happened to my birth family. There are some truths too terrible for a child to bear, some memories mercifully buried by trauma. The authorities found a 6-year-old boy wandering the highways of North Dakota, half-starved, incoherent with terror, spinning tales of trees that ate people and shadows that walked. They couldn't find any record of the right family I claimed to belong to. No campsite was ever discovered. So they created a story, a palatable tragedy, a car accident, no bodies recovered, and sent me to become Daniel Lopez, son of Marco and Juanita Lopez, brother to no one, with no memory of what really happened in the hollow pines. But the hollow pine remembered me. And someday, it will call another lost soul to its valley, wearing my face, using my voice, promising reunion and release from pain. I only pray they're stronger than I almost wasn't. My name is Timothy Hill, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Little Missouri National Grassland in North Dakota, just last summer. Looking back, I should have recognized the warning signs, the way the forest seemed to hold its breath when we entered, the unnatural stillness of the water at our campsite by the lake, the absence of birdsong in what should have been a chorus of wilderness life. But Sarah and I were too caught up in our excitement and our arguments to notice. We'd been dating for 3 years, and our relationship had hit a rough patch. Sarah wanted commitment. I was hesitating. This camping trip to the remote corners of Little Missouri National Grassland was supposed to be our chance to reconnect, to remember why we'd fallen for each other in the first place. Sarah had suggested the location after reading about its stunning landscapes, rolling prairies, rugged badlands, and isolated wooded areas that seemed untouched by human presence. "It'll be romantic," she'd said, her green eyes lighting up as she showed me photos of the terrain. "Just you and me under the stars." What neither of us knew was that the particular area we'd chosen, a secluded spot near the Ma Da Hay Trail, had a history. Local folklore warned about a place where hikers went missing, where strange echoes followed you through the valleys, mimicking your voice but always saying something slightly wrong. The drive to our destination took nearly 6 hours from Bismarck. As we ventured deeper into the grassland, the roads grew narrower, the GPS signal weakened, and the landscape transformed into something ancient and primal. Massive buttes rose from the plains like sentinels. Twisted juniper trees clung to eroded hillsides. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the badlands, painting them in shades of amber and blood. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Sarah asked as our SUV bounced along a barely there dirt road. The rental vehicle wasn't designed for this kind of terrain, and I winced each time we hit a particularly deep rut. The ranger at the visitor center said this leads to the Lake Sakakawea Overlook camping area, I replied, though doubt had begun to creep in. We hadn't seen another vehicle for over an hour, and the paper map I'd been given looked increasingly unfamiliar compared to our surroundings. When we finally reached our destination, the sun was setting. We found ourselves in a small clearing surrounded by twisted cottonwoods, with a view of a still, dark lake below. The place looked nothing like the photographs on the campground website. "This doesn't seem right," Sarah murmured, hugging herself against the sudden chill in the air. "It's probably just different season in those promotional photos," I said, though I didn't believe it. "Come on, let's set up camp before it gets dark." We worked in mostly silence, our earlier excitement replaced by unspoken tension. The tent went up, we gathered firewood, and I managed to start a small campfire as the last traces of daylight faded from the sky. Above us, stars emerged in astonishing clarity, a dazzling canopy undiminished by light pollution. "It is beautiful," Sarah admitted as we sat beside the fire eating our simple dinner of canned soup and crackers in a haunting sort of way. "Worth the drive?" I asked, attempting to rekindle our earlier excitement. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see." That first night I woke to the sound of Sarah's voice calling my name from outside our tent. "Tim, come here. You need to see this." I fumbled for my phone, checking the time. 3:17 a.m. The space beside me in our two-person sleeping bag was empty. "Sarah!" I called, unzipping the tent and peering out into the darkness. The fire had died down to embers that pulsed like dying hearts in the fire pit. "Over here," her voice came again, from somewhere near the edge of the clearing. "By the lake. Hurry." Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped out of the tent. The night air was unnaturally cold for summer, and my breath formed small clouds that dissipated in the beam of my light. "Sarah, what are you doing out here?" I called, sweeping the flashlight across the edge of our campsite. "Nothing." "Tim, please, you have to see this." Her voice sounded different somehow, hollow, as if echoing from inside a cave. I moved toward it cautiously, my bare feet crunching on the dry ground. "This isn't funny," I said, approaching the slope that led down to the water. "It's the middle of the night." As I reached the edge of the clearing, my flashlight beam caught a figure standing motionless at the water's edge, its back to me. Even from a distance, I recognized Sarah's red jacket, her dark hair falling past her shoulders. "Sarah," I called, a tremor in my voice. Slowly, she turned. In the dim light, I could just make out her face, except it wasn't quite right. Her features seemed blurred, as if I was looking at her through frosted glass. Her mouth hung slightly open, and no breath clouded in front of her in the cold air. Before I could process what I was seeing, a hand grabbed my shoulder from behind. I yelped, spinning around to find Sarah, the real Sarah, standing behind me, her eyes wide with fear. "Tim, what the hell are you doing out here?" she hissed. You were calling me," I stammered, turning back toward the lake. The figure was gone. The shoreline stood empty, undisturbed. "I was asleep until I heard you leave the tent," she said. "You were talking to yourself." We stood there in silence for a long moment, the only sound the gentle lapping of water against the shore. Finally, Sarah shivered. "Let's go back to the tent. It's freezing out here." I nodded, but couldn't shake the image of what I'd seen, the not quite Sarah standing by the water's edge. As we walked back to our campsite, I glanced over my shoulder repeatedly but saw nothing except the dark, still surface of the lake reflecting the stars above. Back in the tent, neither of us slept. We lay side by side, listening to the sounds of the night, the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods, the occasional distant howl of a coyote, and something else that seemed to hover just at the edge of hearing, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails against wood. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Sarah's hand found mine in the darkness. "Yes." "What do you think it is?" She didn't answer for a long moment. Then, "I don't think we should be here, Tim." "We'll leave first thing in the morning," I promised, squeezing her hand. But when morning came, our problems had only begun. The SUV wouldn't start. The engine turned over weakly a few times before falling silent. "Great," Sarah muttered, slumping back in the passenger seat. "Just great." I tried again, then checked under the hood, though I knew next to nothing about cars. Nothing looked obviously wrong to my untrained eye. "Battery's probably dead," I said, closing the hood. "We must have left something on." "So what now? We don't have cell service." I ran a hand through my hair, thinking. "The ranger said there's a trail that connects to the main campground. It should only be about 7 miles. We can hike there and get help." Sarah looked doubtful. gazing around at the wild landscape surrounding us. "Are you sure? Maybe we should stay with the car." We told the ranger where we were heading. If we don't check out tomorrow, they'll come looking. But that could be over 24 hours from now. After some discussion, we decided to hike out. We packed a day bag with water, snacks, a first aid kit, and other essentials. I left a note on the dashboard of our vehicle explaining our situation, just in case someone came looking. The trail started out clearly marked, with small wooden posts bearing the symbol of the Ma-Da-Hey Trail, a turtle symbolizing patience and long life. The morning was pleasantly warm, the sky a brilliant blue above the rugged terrain. Despite our circumstances, I found myself appreciating the stark beauty of the Badlands as we hiked, with its layered buttes and hoodoos shaped by millions of years of erosion. "It's like walking on another planet," Sarah remarked, her earlier tension seemingly forgotten as she took in the panoramic views. For the first few hours, the hike was uneventful. We followed the turtle markers, stopping occasionally for water and to take photos of particularly striking formations. The trail wound through a varied landscape, sometimes crossing open prairie, other times dipping into wooded ravines where the temperature dropped noticeably. It was in one of these ravines, about 3 hours into our hike, that I first noticed something odd. The trail forked, with turtle markers visible on both paths. "That's weird," I said, consulting my map. "There shouldn't be a fork here." Sarah peered over my shoulder at the map. "Maybe one's an older route?" I studied both options. The left fork continued through the ravine, while the right climbed steeply up the side toward the ridgeline. "Left looks easier, let's try that." As we continued, the ravine deepened. The walls rose higher on either side and the path grew narrower. The trees, mostly juniper and scrubby pines, grew denser, their branches creating a canopy that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the ground. "Tim," Sarah said after we'd been walking for about 20 minutes, "have you noticed there aren't any animals?" I paused, listening. She was right. She was. The forest was silent. No birdsong, no scurrying of small creatures in the underbrush. Even the wind seemed to have died, leaving the air still and heavy. "Maybe they're hiding because they hear us coming," I suggested, but the explanation felt hollow even to me. We continued walking, both of us now alert to the unnatural silence. The ravine bent sharply to the right, and as we rounded the corner, we came face to face with a dead end. The path simply stopped at a sheer rock wall about 15 feet high. "This can't be right," I said, checking the map again. "The trail's supposed to continue through." "Maybe there was a rock slide," Sarah suggested, though the ground in front of the wall was clear of debris. I approached the rock face, running my hand over its surface. The stone felt strangely warm under my fingers, almost like living flesh. I pulled my hand back quickly. "We should go back. Try the other fork," I said. As we turned to retrace our steps, something caught my eye. A symbol carved into the trunk of one of the junipers lining the path. It resembled the turtle of the trail markers but distorted somehow, its shell cracked and its limbs too long, almost human-like. "Did you see that before?" I asked Sarah, pointing to the carving. She frowned, moving closer to examine it. "No, it looks fresh, too." A chill ran down my spine despite the warm day. I took Sarah's hand. "Come on, let's move quickly." We hurried back the way we'd come, but something felt different. The ravine seemed deeper, the walls higher and more imposing. Shadows stretched across the path at impossible angles, given the time of day. And then I noticed something else. The turtle markers were gone from the trees. "Sarah," I said, trying to keep the panic from my voice, "do you see any trail markers?" She looked around, her face paling. They were everywhere before. We stood still for a moment, turning in a slow circle. The path was still visible, but all signs of official trail maintenance had vanished. No markers, no occasional wooden steps in steeper sections, just wild forest that looked increasingly as if humans had never passed through it. "This doesn't make sense," Sarah whispered. "We only walked for 20 minutes in this direction." "Let's just keep going," I said. "We'll hit the fork again and take the other path." But after another 40 minutes of walking, we found no fork. The ravine simply continued, twisting and turning through the landscape. The walls had grown so high now that we could only see a narrow strip of sky above us. "Tim, we need to climb out," Sarah said finally, her voice tight with fear. "We're not on the trail anymore. This isn't right." I nodded, eyeing the steep walls. "That section looks manageable," I said, pointing to a place where erosion had created a series of natural steps in the rock. The climb was harder than it looked. The rock crumbled under our hands in places, sending small avalanches of pebbles down into the ravine. By the time we reached the top, we were both breathing hard, our hands scraped and dirty. The view from the ridgeline should have given us our bearings. In theory, we could see for miles across the grassland. Instead, we found ourselves looking at an unfamiliar landscape. Rolling hills covered in dense forest stretched in all directions. Nothing like the mixed prairie and badlands we'd been hiking through earlier. "This isn't possible," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "Where are we?" I pulled out my phone, though I knew it would show no signal. To my surprise, there was one bar of service. Quickly, I opened the Maps app only to find it couldn't determine our location. According to the phone, we were nowhere. "Let me try calling for help," I said, dialing 911. The call went through, but the connection was poor. "911, what's your emergency?" a voice answered, distorted by static. "We're lost in Little Missouri National Grassland," I explained quickly. "Our car broke down and we tried to hike to the main campground, but we've lost the trail." "Where in the grassland are you?" the dispatcher asked. "We were camping near Lake Sakakawea Overlook," I said. "We followed the Ma-Da hay trail north." There was a long pause on the other end. Then, "Sir, there is no Lake Sakakawea Overlook in Little Missouri National Grassland. Lake Sakakawea is over 100 miles away." Before I could respond, the call dropped. I tried redialing, but now my phone showed no service at all. "What did they say?" Sarah asked. I hesitated, then decided to be honest. "They said we're not where we think we are. That Lake Sakakawea isn't even in this park." Sarah's face went white. "That's impossible. We saw the lake. We camped right next to it." I put my phone away, trying to think logically. "Let's use the sun to navigate. It's afternoon now, so that's west." I pointed to where the sun hung in the sky. "The visitor center is southeast of where we were camping, so we should head that way." I pointed in what I hoped was the right direction. Sarah nodded, visibly trying to compose herself. "Okay, that makes sense." We set off across the ridgeline, moving as quickly as we could through the unfamiliar terrain. The forest was dense here, the ground covered in a thick carpet of pine needles that muffled our footsteps. The silence was profound, broken only by our breathing and the occasional snapping of a twig underfoot. After about an hour of walking, the trees thinned and we found ourselves at the edge of a small clearing. In the center stood a cabin, or what remained of one. The structure was ancient, its log walls weathered to silver, half of its roof caved in. A stone chimney rose from the wreckage, still largely intact. "Should we check it out?" Sarah asked. "There might be something useful inside, or a map." I nodded, though something about the cabin made me uneasy. It looked long abandoned, yet there was a sense of waiting about it, as if the broken structure were holding its breath. As we approached, I noticed carvings in the logs, symbols similar to the distorted turtle I'd seen in the ravine. They covered the exterior walls in a chaotic pattern, some fresh enough that pale wood showed through the weathered gray surface. Inside, the cabin consisted of a single room. Debris from the collapsed roof littered the floor, rotting timber, rusted corrugated metal, and what might once have been furniture, now reduced to unrecognizable lumps of decay. The air smelled of mold and something else, something metallic and unpleasant. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to the back wall. Unlike the exterior walls, this one was relatively intact, and it was covered in writing. Hundreds, maybe thousands of words carved into the wood in a tiny, cramped script. I moved closer, trying to make sense of the text. Most of it was illegible, the words running together without spacing or punctuation. But certain phrases stood out. It follows by voice. First, it calls, then it comes. Don't answer when you hear your name. The lake isn't real. Nothing is real once you enter. A cold weight settled in my stomach as I read. Next to me, Sarah had gone very still. "Tim," she whispered, "listen." I held my breath, straining my ears. At first I heard nothing. Then, faintly, from somewhere in the forest surrounding the cabin. "Timothy? Sarah? Where are you guys? I found the trail." It was my voice, perfectly mimicked down to the slight unevenness in the way I pronounced S sounds. Sarah's fingers dug into my arm. "Don't answer it," she hissed. The voice came again, closer this time. "Guys, come on. I can see the campground from here." Every instinct screamed at me to respond, to call out to what sounded exactly like myself. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood. A new sound emerged. Footsteps in the underbrush, moving toward the cabin. Heavy, deliberate steps that no human would make. "We need to hide," I whispered to Sarah. The cabin offered little in the way of concealment. The only option was a space beneath what remained of a built-in bed frame in one corner, where the collapsed roof created a small cavity. We squeezed into the tight space just as the footsteps reached the cabin door. From our hiding place, we could see only the floor of the entrance, and the thing that stepped into view was not a human foot. It was broader, with elongated toes that ended in what looked like claws. The skin, if it was skin, had a grayish cast and seemed to ripple, as if whatever was beneath it wasn't solid, but fluid. The creature moved slowly across the cabin, its strange feet making a wet, slapping sound on the wooden floor. It stopped near our hiding place, and I held my breath, certain it would sense us. A drop of something dark and viscous fell from above, landing on the floor inches from my face. Then another. I looked up slowly and immediately wished I hadn't. The creature was leaning over, its face, or what should have been a face, hovering just above our hiding spot. It had no discernible features except for a mouth that split its head nearly in half. The mouth opened, revealing rows of needle-like teeth and a long, pale tongue that flicked out, tasting the air. "Tim," it said in my voice, the sound emerging from that impossible mouth without lips or proper vocal cords. "Why are you hiding from yourself?" Beside me, Sarah made a small, strangled sound. The creature's head snapped in her direction, the mouth widening impossibly. "Run!" I hissed, shoving her toward the narrow opening on the other side of our hiding place, away from the creature. We burst from our concealment, scrambling over debris toward the back of the cabin. Behind us, the thing let out a sound like nothing I'd ever heard, a high, keening wail that seemed to come from multiple throats at once. The back wall of the cabin had partially collapsed, leaving a gap just wide enough to squeeze through. Sarah went first, her slim body easily fitting through the opening. I followed, the rough wood tearing at my clothes and skin as I forced my way out. We emerged into forest even thicker than what surrounded the cabin's entrance. Without discussion, we ran, pushing through dense underbrush, branches whipping at our faces. I could hear the creature behind us, moving with unnatural speed through the trees. "Tim," its voice called, now sounding like Sarah. "Tim, wait for me. I'm hurt." The pleading in the voice was perfect, exactly how Sarah would sound if injured and frightened. I gritted my teeth and ran faster, keeping my eyes on the real Sarah just ahead of me. We burst from the forest onto the edge of a steep ravine, different from the one we'd been in earlier, but similar in its sheer walls and narrow floor. Below, a stream trickled through a rocky bed. "We have to climb down," Sarah gasped, already looking for a path. The sound of breaking branches behind us spurred us on. We half climbed, half slid down the ravine wall, using roots and rock outcroppings as handholds. By the time we reached the bottom, my hands were bleeding and Sarah had torn a gash in her hiking pants, exposing a long scratch on her thigh. "Which way?" she asked, looking up and down the narrow canyon. I pointed downstream. "Water usually leads to civilization." We followed the stream, moving as quickly as we could over the uneven ground. The ravine walls rose high on either side, blocking much of the daylight. As we walked, I checked my phone repeatedly, hoping for a signal, but the screen remained stubbornly empty of bars. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, the ravine widened, the walls gradually becoming less steep. The stream grew broader and deeper, forming occasional pools where the water looked almost black in the shadows. "Do you think we lost it?" Sarah asked, her voice little more than a whisper. Before I could answer, we heard it. My voice again, but distorted now, as if underwater. "Sarah, why are you with him? Don't you know what he really thinks of you? Let me show you." The voice was coming from ahead of us, somewhere around the next bend in the ravine. "Ignore it," I said. "It's trying to separate us." We pressed on, but more cautiously now. As we rounded the bend, the ravine opened up into a wider space, and there, in the center of the stream, stood a figure. From a distance, it looked exactly like me, down to the blue hiking shirt and khaki shorts I was wearing. But as we drew closer, the wrongness became apparent. Its proportions were slightly off, arms too long, neck too thin, and its face, while bearing a superficial resemblance to mine, seemed to shift subtly when viewed directly, features flowing like wax under heat. "Hello, Zara," it said, my voice emerging from its approximation of my mouth. "I have something to tell you, something he's been hiding." Sarah's hand tightened on mine. "It's not real," she murmured, seemingly to herself. "It's not Tim." The creature tilted its head at an impossible angle. "But I am Tim, the real Tim. Ask me anything. I know everything he knows." Its gaze, flat and cold, fixed on me. "And some things he doesn't want to know about himself." "Let's go back," I said to Sarah, tugging her hand. "Find another way." "There is no other way," the thing said, its voice changing, becoming deeper, resonant in a way that made my chest vibrate painfully. "This has always been the only path." It took a step toward us, its movements jerky, as if it wasn't fully in control of its limbs. Water splashed around its feet, but made no sound. "What do you want?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. The creature smiled, a horrible parody of my own smile that stretched too wide, revealing teeth that were curved and sharp like fishhooks. "To become," it said simply, "to wear you better than you wear yourself." It lunged suddenly, moving with that unnatural speed we'd glimpsed in the forest. But instead of coming for me, it went straight for Sarah, hands outstretched. I reacted without thinking, shoving Sarah hard to the side. She fell heavily on the rocky stream bed as the creature collided with me. The impact sent us both tumbling into one of the deep pools in the stream. The water was shockingly cold and surprisingly deep. I thrashed, trying to find the surface, but the creature held me down, its strength inhuman. In the murky water, I could see its face changing, features melting and reforming as it pressed closer to mine. Its mouth opened, wider than any human mouth could, stretching to engulf my head. Panic gave me strength. I reached up, fingers finding its eyes, or where eyes should be, and drove my thumbs in hard. The thing recoiled, its grip loosening just enough for me to break free and kick toward the surface. I emerged from the water gasping, to find Sarah at the edge of the pool, reaching for me. I grabbed her hand and she pulled me onto the bank. Without stopping to look back, we ran, following the stream as it continued through the widening ravine. Behind us, something surfaced from the pool, no longer even attempting to look human. I caught only a glimpse as we fled. A pale, elongated form with too many limbs, its skin gleaming wetly in the dim light. The ravine eventually opened onto a broader valley. The stream joined a larger river, and to our immense relief, we could see what looked like a dirt road running parallel to the water about 100 yards away. We made for it, stumbling in our exhaustion, expecting at any moment to feel cold hands grabbing at us from behind. But when we reached the road and looked back, there was nothing there. Just the peaceful flow of the river and the entrance to the ravine, shadows gathering as the afternoon waned toward evening. "Do you think it's gone?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse from exertion. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we need to keep moving." We followed the road, hoping it would lead to a ranger station, or at least to other people. As the sun began to set, painting the Badlands in shades of orange and purple, we spotted a vehicle in the distance, an old pickup truck moving slowly along the rough road toward us. We waved frantically, and to our relief, the truck slowed and then stopped. The driver, an elderly man with leathery skin and sharp blue eyes, rolled down his window and regarded us with surprise. "You folks look like you've had a rough time," he observed, taking in our soaked, battered appearance. "Our car broke down," I explained quickly. "We got lost trying to hike out." The man nodded slowly. "Where were you camping?" "Near Lake Sakakawea Overlook," Sarah said. The man's expression changed subtly. "That's so? Funny place to camp." "The ranger recommended it," I said defensively. "Which ranger would that be?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Before I could answer, he shook his head. "Never mind. Hop in the back. I'll take you to my place. It's not far, and you can call for help from there." Too exhausted to question our good fortune, we climbed into the bed of the pickup. As the vehicle bumped along the dirt road, I held Sarah close, both of us trembling with cold and residual fear. The man's place turned out to be a modest cabin set back from the road, with a generator humming outside and a battered SUV parked in what passed for a driveway. Inside, it was simply furnished but clean and warm, with a wood stove crackling in one corner. "Name's Frank," the man said, gesturing for us to sit at a small kitchen table. "Frank Weber. Been living out here most of my life." "I'm Tim, and this is Sarah," I replied. "Thank you for helping us." Frank nodded, putting a kettle on the stove. "You'll want to dry off and warm up. I've got some clothes that might fit you," he said to me. "And my daughter leaves things here sometimes," he added to Sarah. "Bathroom's through there if you want to clean up." While Sarah took him up on the offer to shower, I sat at the table, wrapped in a blanket he'd provided, and tried to make sense of what had happened. "So," Frank said, placing a mug of strong tea in front of me, "you want to tell me what really happened out there?" I hesitated, then decided to start with the most immediately relevant question. The 911 dispatcher said there's no Lake Sakakawea Overlook in Little Missouri, but that's where the ranger told us to go. Frank's weathered face remained impassive. "They're right. Lake Sakakawea is a good 100 miles northwest of here." "But we camped by a lake," I insisted. "We were following the Ma-Da-Hey Trail." "The trail doesn't go near any lakes in this part of the grassland," Frank said. "Not real ones, anyway." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. "What do you mean, not real ones?" Frank sighed, settling into the chair across from me. "How much do you know about this area? About its history?" "Nothing, really," I admitted. "We're just tourists passing through." "This land has a lot of stories," Frank said, his voice taking on the cadence of someone used to telling tales. "Some from the indigenous peoples who lived here first, some from the settlers who came later. One of those stories is about a creature the Mandan called Mihtuta Hang Kush, the Lone Man. They say he was once human, but became something else, something that feeds on souls by taking their form." I remembered the thing in the stream, its face melting and reforming as it tried to engulf mine. And this lone man. He creates false landscapes? Fake lakes? Frank nodded slowly. "The stories say he makes places that look like what you're seeking, to lure you in. Then he traps you, learns your voice, your face, and eventually takes your place in the world." "But we escaped," I said. "Did you?" Frank asked quietly. His blue eyes, which had seemed merely sharp before, now held something else, a knowing that made my skin crawl. Or did he let you go for now, because he's already gotten what he needed? Before I could respond, Sarah emerged from the bathroom, dressed in borrowed clothes too large for her slim frame. Her face was pale but composed, her wet hair combed back neatly. "Feel better?" Frank asked her, his manner changing instantly to simple hospitality. "Much, thank you," she replied, taking the seat next to me. Under the table, her hand found mine and squeezed, hard. Frank made us a simple dinner of canned soup and crackers, eerily similar to what we'd eaten at our campsite the night before. As we ate, he explained that the nearest town was about 30 miles away and offered to drive us there in the morning. "You can stay in my daughter's room tonight," he told Sarah. "And there's a couch in the living room," he added to me. After dinner, exhaustion hit us both hard. Sarah excused herself to the offered bedroom, while I settled onto the couch with a spare pillow and blanket. Despite my fatigue, sleep proved elusive. Every creak of the cabin's timber frame, every whisper of wind outside set my nerves jangling. I must have dozed off eventually, because I woke suddenly to the sound of movement. Opening my eyes, I saw a figure standing in the doorway between the living room and the short hallway that led to the bedrooms. "Sarah," I whispered. The figure didn't respond. In the dim light filtering through the windows, I could just make out that it was Sarah's general size and shape, but something was off about how it stood. Too still, arms hanging at slightly the wrong angle. I sat up slowly. "Sarah, is everything okay?" The figure took a step forward, and as it moved into a patch of moonlight coming through the window, I saw its face, or rather, the absence of a face. Where Sarah's features should have been was just smooth, pale skin, with indentations suggesting where eyes and mouth would eventually form. I scrambled off the couch, backing away. "Frank!" I called out. "Frank, something's wrong!" No answer came from the back of the cabin. The thing that wasn't Sarah took another step toward me, its movements becoming more fluid, more natural with each passing second. As I watched in horror, features began to appear on its blank face. First the suggestion of eyes, then the curve of a nose, finally a mouth that slowly stretched into a smile. "Tim?" it said in Sarah's voice. Perfect now, with none of the underwater quality I'd heard from the creature in the stream. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I continued backing away until I hit the front door. My hand fumbled for the knob. "Don't go outside," the thing said, still in Sarah's voice but with an undertone of something else now. Something ancient and hungry. "It's not safe out there. Stay with me. Stay with us." I turned the knob and flung the door open, prepared to run into the night. But what waited outside wasn't the yard I'd seen earlier. Instead, I found myself looking at the ravine where we'd encountered the creature, the deep pool where it had tried to drown me glistening in the moonlight. I slammed the door shut. "This isn't real," I said, more to myself than to the thing wearing Sarah's incomplete face. "None of this is real." "Oh, Tim," it said, its mouth now fully formed and curved into a smile that was almost, but not quite, Sarah's. "Reality is such a fragile concept out here. Didn't Frank tell you? This land has many stories." I backed along the wall, trying to put distance between myself and the thing. "Where is Sarah? The real Sarah?" It tilted its head, the gesture eerily reminiscent of how the creature in the stream had moved. "She's here. She's part of us now. Soon. You will be, too." "Frank!" I shouted again, louder this time. "Frank, help!" The thing's smile widened. "Frank has been gone for a very long time, Tim. It's just us now. It's always been just us." My back hit a window. Without taking my eyes off the creature, I fumbled behind me, finding the latch and pushing the window open. The thing lunged suddenly, moving with that unnatural speed I'd seen before. I dove through the window, feeling glass break against my shoulder as I tumbled out into the night. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind from my lungs. Gasping, I looked up to see where I'd landed. and found myself staring at our campsite by the lake. Our tent stood exactly as we'd left it, the embers of our campfire still glowing softly in the fire pit. "No," I whispered, "this isn't possible." As I struggled to my feet, I heard the tent unzip. Sarah emerged, looking exactly as she had when we'd first arrived at the campsite. "Tim," she called. "She?" Her voice normal, concerned. "Where did you go? I woke up and you were gone." I stood frozen, unable to trust what I was seeing. "You're not real," I said. "None of this is real." Sarah frowned, taking a step toward me. "Tim, you're scaring me. What happened?" I backed away. "Stay there. Don't come any closer." Hurt flashed across her face. "What's wrong with you? Did you have a nightmare or something?" I looked around wildly, searching for any sign that would confirm this was just another illusion. The campsite looked exactly as it should. The stars overhead matched the pattern I remembered from when we'd arrived. Even the cool night air felt right against my skin. "If you're really Sarah," I said carefully, "tell me something only you would know, something personal." She sighed, crossing her arms. "Really, Tim? Fine. When we first met at Jake's party, you spilled red wine on my white dress and tried to clean it with club soda, but made it worse. Then you gave me your jacket to cover it up, and we ended up talking on the balcony until sunrise." She paused. "Is that personal enough, or should I mention the birthmark on your left hip that you're weirdly self-conscious about?" It sounded right. It sounded like Sarah. But so had the voice calling me to the lake that first night, and the voice in the ravine. "What happened after we set up camp?" I asked. "What did we do yesterday?" Sarah's frown deepened. "What do you mean? We just set up camp a few hours ago. We had dinner, talked for a while, and went to bed. You've only been gone maybe 20 minutes. My mind reeled. Had all of it. The figure by the lake, the hike, the ravine, the cabin. Been some sort of hallucination? A vivid nightmare? I took a cautious step toward her. "Sarah, I swear I've been gone for more than a day. We tried to leave this morning, but the car wouldn't start. We hiked out and got lost, and there was something following us. Something that could mimic our voices." Sarah's expression changed from concern to alarm. "Tim, you've been right here the whole time. You fell asleep next to me in the tent. I only noticed you were gone when I woke up a little while ago to use the bathroom." I pressed my hands to my temples, trying to make sense of the conflicting realities. This doesn't make sense. It felt so real. "It was just a nightmare," Sarah said gently, moving closer. "A really vivid one, from the sound of it." She reached out to touch my arm, and I flinched involuntarily. Hurt flashed across her face again, but she let her hand drop. "Look," she said, "why don't we just go back to the tent? It's cold out here, and you're not even wearing shoes." I looked down at my feet, bare, just as they had been when I'd followed the fake Sarah's voice to the lake. No signs of the cuts and bruises I should have had from our desperate hike through the ravine. "Okay," I said slowly. "Let's go back to the tent." As we walked the short distance to our campsite, I scrutinized everything around us. The still, dark lake, the twisted cottonwood surrounding the clearing, the stars overhead. Everything looked normal, yet a sense of wrongness lingered at the edges of my perception. Inside the tent, our sleeping bags lay side by side, just as we'd left them. Sarah crawled into hers, watching me expectantly. "Aren't you coming to bed?" I hesitated, then slowly slid into my sleeping bag. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that I was missing something crucial. But exhaustion was overtaking me, making it hard to think clearly. "Try to get some sleep," Sarah murmured, reaching out to stroke my hair. "You'll feel better in the morning." Despite my fear and confusion, my eyelids grew heavy. The rhythm of Sarah's breathing beside me was comforting, familiar. Maybe she was right. Maybe it had all been a nightmare. I woke to daylight filtering through the tent fabric. The space beside me was empty. "Sarah," I called, sitting up quickly. No answer. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The morning was bright and clear, the lake a perfect mirror reflecting the blue sky. But the campsite was empty. No sign of Sarah. "Sarah!" I called louder, turning in a circle. "Where are you?" Movement caught my eye. A figure standing at the edge of the lake, just where I'd seen the not quite Sarah that first night. Even from a distance, I recognized the red jacket, the dark hair. My heart pounding, I approached slowly. "Sarah?" She turned and relief flooded through me. It was Sarah. Normal, real Sarah. Her face exactly as it should be. "Morning," she said with a smile. "Sleep okay?" "Not really," I admitted. I think I had a really bad nightmare. And then when I woke up and you weren't there..." She frowned. "Sorry, I didn't want to wake you. You seemed like you needed the sleep. I just came down to check out the water." I moved to stand beside her, looking out over the lake. The surface was unnaturally still, not even the slightest ripple disturbing its mirror-like calm. "Do you think we could leave today?" I asked. "I know we plan to stay for the weekend, but I've got a bad feeling about this place." Sarah studied my face. "You really are shaken up, aren't you?" "Yeah, we can leave. Let me just go get started on packing up." As she walked back toward the campsite, I remained by the water, staring at its glassy surface. Something about it bothered me, beyond the unnatural stillness. I knelt and reached out, letting my fingers break the surface. The water was warm, too warm for a mountain lake in the morning, and as my hand entered it, I felt something brush against my fingers, something solid and slick. I jerked my hand back. The water, where I'd touched it, rippled strangely, the movements not following the normal physics of liquid. Instead of expanding outward in concentric circles, the ripples seemed to gather, to coalesce into a pattern. I watched, transfixed with horror, as the surface of the lake began to change. The ripples grew, merged, and then rose, the water itself taking shape, forming a column that twisted and contorted until it resembled a human figure. The figure stepped out of the lake onto the shore, water streaming from its form. As I watched, the liquid solidified, features sharpening, details emerging, until Frank, the old man who had supposedly rescued us, stood before me. "Morning, Tim," he said, his voice exactly as I remembered it. "Sleep well?" I scrambled backward, nearly falling in my haste to get away. "You're not real," I gasped. "None of this is real." Frank's weathered face split in a smile that was far too wide for human muscles to achieve. "Oh, this is very real. Tim, just not the kind of real you're used to." "What are you?" I demanded, still backing away. "What do you want from us?" Frank, or the thing wearing Frank's shape, tilted his head in that now familiar, unnatural angle. "You know what I am. I told you myself, through this form." He gestured to his body. "The lone man, the mimic, the echo. I've had many names over the centuries." "Where's Sarah?" I asked, my voice shaking. "The real Sarah." "She's here," Frank said, his form rippling slightly, features blurring before resolidifying. "She's part of us now, as you will be." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I saw her just now. She's back at the campsite." Frank laughed, a sound like stones grinding together. "Did you? Are you sure about that, Tim? How many times have you woken up since you came to my lake? How many cycles have you lived through? Your mind creates comforting narratives, tries to make sense of what's happening. But time has no meaning here." A terrible suspicion formed in my mind. The nightmare. That wasn't a nightmare, was it? That all happened. We escaped from you. "You cannot escape," Frank said simply. "No one ever has. You entered my domain willingly when you followed the false ranger's directions. You spoke to the echoes when they called your names. You drank the water from my lake. You are already part of me. Your memories, your voices, your faces. I'm simply collecting the rest." As he spoke, his form continued to ripple and change. Patches of his skin became transparent, revealing a darkness beneath that seemed to swirl and pulse with its own inner light. His eyes sank into his skull. then re-emerged as glassy, reflective orbs that showed my own terrified face staring back at me. "Stop it," I said, still backing away. "Just stop it and let us go." "I cannot stop any more than you can stop breathing," the thing said, its voice changing now, becoming deeper, resonant in a way that made my chest vibrate painfully. "This is what I am. This is what I do. I echo. I mimic. I become." It took a step toward me, and another. With each step, its form became less human, more fluid. Limbs elongated. The face melted and reformed, features sliding across its surface like oil on water. "But I am not cruel," it continued. "I offer a kind of immortality. Your memories, your voice, your face, they will live on as part of me. I will wear them when I hunt. I will use them to call others to my lake." I glanced over my shoulder, looking for an escape route. The campsite was visible through the trees, but something was wrong with it. The tent seemed to flicker, sometimes there, sometimes not. The trees around it bent at impossible angles, and standing in the middle of it all was Sarah, or something wearing Sarah's shape. "There's nowhere to run," the thing that had been Frank said, following my gaze. "This is my domain. Every path leads back to me." I turned and ran anyway. Not toward the campsite, but along the lakeshore, looking for any way out of the clearing. The thing followed, its movements becoming less human, more predatory. A loping gait that covered ground with unnatural speed. The shoreline curved, and as I rounded the bend, I saw something that made me skid to a halt. Our SUV parked at the end of the dirt road just as we'd left it. Hope surged. If the car was real, maybe we could still escape. I sprinted toward it, fumbling in my pocket for the keys as I ran. Behind me, the creature let out that terrible multi-throated wail I remembered from the cabin. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. I reached the SUV and yanked at the driver's side door. Locked. I jammed the key into the lock, twisted, and flung the door open. Jumping into the seat, I slammed the door shut and hit the lock button just as the creature reached the vehicle. It pressed itself against the driver's side window, its form now barely humanoid. A writhing mass of semi-transparent flesh through which I could see darker shapes moving. A face formed in the mass, pressing out from within like a hand pushing against a rubber sheet. The face was Sarah's. "Let me in. Me. Tim," it said, Sarah's voice emerging from a mouth that formed and dissolved in the undulating flesh. "We can be together forever." I shoved the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Relief flooded through me. The creature pulled back slightly at the sound, then pressed closer again. Limbs that were not quite arms extended from its mass, wrapping around the vehicle, searching for a way in. I threw the SUV into reverse and hit the gas. The vehicle lurched backward, breaking free of the creature's grasp. In the rearview mirror, I saw it following, flowing across the ground with that unnatural speed. I spun the wheel, turning the SUV around, then shifted into drive and floored the accelerator. The dirt road stretched ahead, winding through the Badlands. In the mirror, the creature continued to pursue, its form shifting constantly as it moved. The road twisted and turned through the rugged terrain. I drove, recklessly taking curves too fast, the SUV fishtailing on the loose dirt. But no matter how fast I went, the creature kept pace, always visible in my rearview mirror. After what seemed like hours but could have been minutes, I saw something ahead that made my heart leap. A paved road, a real highway cutting through the Badlands. I pressed the accelerator to the floor, the SUV bouncing violently as it hit a series of ruts in the dirt road. As I approached the junction with the highway, I glanced in the rearview mirror again. The creature had stopped at the edge of the dirt road, its form roiling with what looked like frustration. It could not follow onto the highway. Relief surged through me as the SUV's tires hit pavement. I'd made it. I'd escaped. Only then did I realize what was missing. Sarah. In my panic to escape, I'd left without her. I slammed on the brakes, the SUV skidding to a halt on the empty highway. In the mirror, I could still see the creature waiting at the junction, its form now coalescing into a human shape again. This time, my shape. I had a terrible choice to make: continue to safety or go back for Sarah. But was there even a Sarah to go back for? The creature had said she was already part of it. Had that been true, or just another lie to trap me? I sat there on the empty highway, engine idling, torn between the instinct for self-preservation and the desperate hope that I could still save her. The decision was made for me when I saw movement in the passenger seat. "You forgot me," Sarah's voice said. I turned slowly to find Sarah sitting beside me, exactly as she had been when we first drove into the park, down to the blue tank top and hiking shorts. "Sarah?" I whispered, hardly daring to hope. "Is it really you?" She smiled, but the expression didn't reach her eyes. Who else would it be? I studied her face, looking for any sign that this wasn't the real Sarah. Her features seemed right, her expressions natural. But something in her eyes, a flatness, a stillness that reminded me of the lake, made my skin crawl. "What happened back there?" I asked cautiously. "How did you get to the car?" "I was always here," she said, her voice perfect but her phrasing wrong. "Waiting for you to come back for me." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "That's not possible. I saw you at the campsite just before I ran." Sarah tilted her head, the movement just slightly too fluid. "Did you? Are you sure about that, Tim? How many times have you escaped since you came to the lake? How many cycles have you lived through?" The words, the exact words the frank creature had used, confirmed what I'd already suspected. This wasn't Sarah. "You're not her," I said, reaching for the door handle. "You're it, the echo." Sarah's face rippled, features temporarily losing definition before reforming. "I am Sarah now," it said. "Part of her is in me. Her memories, her voice, her face. And soon you will join us too." Its hand shot out, impossibly fast, gripping my wrist. The skin where it touched me burned cold, and I could feel something flowing from its flesh into mine, a liquid darkness that spread beneath my skin like ink in water. With a cry of revulsion and fear, I tore free, flinging myself out of the SUV onto the highway. I stumbled, nearly fell, then regained my balance and ran, not back toward the dirt road where the creature had been, but down the highway, hoping to flag down another vehicle. Behind me, I heard the SUV's door open, footsteps on the asphalt. I didn't look back, just ran harder. The highway stretched empty in both directions, cutting through the Badlands like a black river. The morning sun beat down, heat rising from the pavement in visible waves. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror drove me forward. After what felt like miles, I heard the most beautiful sound imaginable, the rumble of an engine approaching from behind. I turned, waving my arms frantically, and saw an 18-wheeler coming toward me. The truck slowed, air brakes hissing as it came to a stop beside me. The driver, a heavy-set man with a gray beard, leaned out the window. "You okay, buddy? Car trouble?" I glanced back down the highway. No sign of the SUV or the thing wearing Sarah's form, just empty road shimmering in the heat. "Yeah," I gasped. "My car broke down a ways back. Can you give me a ride to the nearest town?" The trucker nodded. "Hop in." I climbed into the passenger seat, my whole body trembling with exhaustion and lingering fear. As the truck rumbled back into motion, I watched the side mirror obsessively, expecting at any moment to see the SUV pursuing us. "Where you headed?" the trucker asked. "Anywhere," I said. "Just away from here." He gave me an odd look but didn't press further. "Name's Ray," he offered after a moment. "Tim?" I replied automatically, then immediately regretted giving my real name. If the creature could mimic voices and faces, could it follow me by name as well? Ray seemed normal enough, solid, human, real in a way that gave me hope I'd truly escaped. He talked as he drove, telling me about his route, his family back in Minnesota. the unusual things he'd seen on the road over the years. I responded with monosyllables, my mind still back at the lake with Sarah. Had she ever been real? Or had the creature been playing with me from the beginning, creating a false companion to make the hunt more interesting? No, I decided. Sarah had been real. Our relationship had been real. The arguments, the love, the history between us. Those memories felt solid in a way the nightmarish events at the lake did not, which meant I'd left her behind. I need to go back, I said suddenly, interrupting Ray mid-sentence. He frowned. Back where? To your car? No. Yes. I struggled to find words that wouldn't make me sound insane. My girlfriend, she's still back there. I need to help her. Ray's frown deepened. You left your girlfriend with a broken-down car in the middle of nowhere? Put like that, it sounded terrible. But how could I explain the truth? That she might already be absorbed into some ancient, shape-shifting predator? That I might be driving back into a trap? It's complicated, I said finally, but I have to go back for her. Ray studied me for a long moment, then sighed. Look, there's a sheriff's station in the next town. We'll be there in about 20 minutes. Why don't we stop there, get some help? It was the rational suggestion, but something told me law enforcement wouldn't be able to help with this. Still, I nodded, if only to keep from being dropped off on the side of the road. The town turned out to be little more than a crossroads with a gas station, a diner, and a small sheriff's substation. Ray pulled into the gas station, nodding toward the sheriff's office. They should be able to help you out. Good luck, buddy. I thanked him and walked across to the substation, trying to decide what I would say. The truth was out of the question. Even a sanitized version, that I'd left Sarah at a campsite after an argument, made me sound like the kind of person the police should be suspicious of. Inside, a deputy looked up from his desk. Can I help you? I hope so, I said. My girlfriend and I were camping in Little Missouri National Grassland, near... I hesitated, then decided on a version of the truth. Near a lake. We had an argument, and I drove off. But now I'm worried about her being out there alone. The deputy raised an eyebrow. A lake in Little Missouri. Where exactly? I'm not sure of the exact location, I admitted. A ranger at the visitor center directed us there, said it was near the Ma-Da-Hey Trail. The deputy's expression changed subtly. Which ranger would that be? The same question Frank, or the thing posing as Frank, had asked. A chill ran through me. I don't remember his name, I said carefully. Older guy, gray hair, about my height. The deputy nodded slowly. And this lake, what did it look like? Small, very still, surrounded by cottonwoods. There was a clearing where we set up camp. The deputy's face had gone carefully blank. Wait here, he said, standing up. He disappeared into a back room, returning a few minutes later with an older man in a sheriff's uniform. This is Sheriff Daniels, the deputy said. Tell him what you just told me. I repeated my story, growing increasingly uneasy at the way the two men exchanged glances. Son, the sheriff said when I'd finished, there aren't any lakes in that part of the grassland. Certainly none near the Ma-Da-Hey Trail. But we camped right next to it, I insisted. I saw it. We both did. Sheriff Daniels sighed, settling into the chair behind the deputy's desk. What's your name? Timothy Hill. And your girlfriend's name? Sarah Wilson. The sheriff pulled out a notepad. When exactly did you two go camping out there? Yesterday, I said. We arrived in the afternoon, set up camp. I stopped, suddenly uncertain. How much time had actually passed? The creature had said time had no meaning in its domain. What day is it today? Wednesday. May 8th, the sheriff said, watching me closely. That's not possible, I said, shaking my head. We went camping on Saturday, May 4th. The sheriff and deputy exchanged another look. Son, Sheriff Daniels said gently, today is Wednesday, May 8th. If you went camping on Saturday, that was 4 days ago. I stared at him. trying to process this. 4 days? Had I lost 4 days to the creature's manipulations? "I need to file a missing persons report," I said. "For Sarah. We need to send people out there to look for her." "We will," the sheriff assured me. "But first, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Every detail you can remember, from the time you arrived at this lake to when you left." So I told them, a carefully edited version that omitted the shape-shifting creature and the impossible physics of the place. In my telling, Sarah and I had argued. I'd stormed off to clear my head, and when I returned to the campsite, she was gone. I'd searched for her, then driven off to get help when I couldn't find her. The sheriff took notes, his expression giving nothing away. When I finished, he tapped his pen against the notepad for a moment. "We'll send out search teams," he said finally. "But I have to tell you, Mr. Hill, your story has some concerning inconsistencies." "What do you mean?" "For one thing, as I said, there are no lakes in that area. For another, May 4th was a period of severe thunderstorms throughout the region. The Ma Da Hay Trail was closed due to flash flood warnings." He fixed me with a steady gaze. "And, most concerning, there's no record of a Sarah Wilson entering the park that weekend." "That's not possible," I said, a cold dread settling in my stomach. "We were there. Together." "Mr. Hill," the sheriff said carefully, "when was the last time you slept, or ate a proper meal?" I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it. When had I last slept? The nightmarish cycles at the lake blurred together in my memory. "I don't know," I admitted. The sheriff's expression softened slightly. "Why don't you come with me? There's a clinic in the next town over. The doctor there can check you out, make sure you're okay, and in the meantime, we'll send deputies out to look for Ms. Wilson." What choice did I have? I nodded, following the sheriff out to his cruiser. The clinic turned out to be a small rural hospital. After a brief exam during which I apparently displayed signs of dehydration and exhaustion, I was admitted. The doctor, a kind woman in her 50s, asked gentle questions about my medical history, any substances I might have consumed, and whether I had a history of episodes like this. "Episodes like what?" I asked, growing increasingly frustrated. "Like losing my girlfriend in the wilderness?" The doctor exchanged a glance with Sheriff Daniels, who had remained in the room. "Mr. Hill," she said carefully, "Sheriff Daniels informs me that you believe you were camping with a girlfriend named Sarah Wilson this past weekend, at a lake that doesn't exist in Little Missouri National Grassland." "We were there," I insisted. "The lake is real. Sarah is real." "I'm sure she is," the doctor soothed. "But you need rest now. We're going to give you something to help you sleep, and in the morning, we can talk more about finding Sarah." I wanted to protest, to demand they take me seriously, but exhaustion was overwhelming me. When a nurse came in with a sedative, I didn't resist. As the drug took effect, my last thoughts were of Sarah, the real Sarah, not the thing that had worn her face, and whether I would ever see her again. I woke to sunlight streaming through hospital blinds. For a moment, I was disoriented, unsure where I was or how I'd gotten there. Then the memories came flooding back. The lake, the creature, the sheriff's station. Sarah. I sat up too quickly, setting off a wave of dizziness. A nurse noticed the movement and came over. "Easy there," she said. "You've been out for quite a while." "How long?" I asked, my voice rough from disuse. "About 14 hours. You must have needed it." I rubbed my face, trying to clear the fog from my mind. "Has anyone found Sarah, my girlfriend?" The nurse's expression was carefully neutral. "The sheriff should be by soon. He can update you." True to her word, Sheriff Daniels arrived about an hour later, after I'd been given a meal and allowed to shower. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling into the chair beside my bed. "Better," I admitted. "Clearer." "Have you found Sarah?" The sheriff hesitated. "Mr. Hill, we sent deputies to the area you described. They found no campsite, no lake, and no sign of Sarah Wilson. "That's not possible," I said, the familiar refrain starting to sound hollow even to my own ears. "There's more," the sheriff continued. "We ran Sarah Wilson's name through our systems. The only Sarah Wilson in our records matching your girlfriend's description is a woman who died in a car accident near the grassland 5 years ago." The room seemed to tilt around me. "No," I whispered. That's not my Sarah." "There's something else," Sheriff Daniels said, his voice gentler now. "We found your car, Mr. Hill. It was abandoned at a scenic overlook about 10 miles from where you claimed to be camping. The keys were in the ignition, both front doors were open, and there were what appeared to be women's personal items inside, a purse, a cell phone." "That doesn't make sense," I said. "I drove away in our car. A trucker picked me up when it broke down." The sheriff shook his head. "No trucker has reported picking you up. In fact, we're still trying to figure out how you got from the overlook to town. It's a good 30 miles through rough country." My head was spinning. None of this made sense. I remembered driving away from the lake, the creature pursuing, then taking the form of Sarah in the passenger seat. I remembered jumping from the vehicle and being picked up by Ray the trucker. But what if those were false memories too? What if everything since entering the creature's domain had been manipulation? "I want to see the car," I said. Sheriff Daniels nodded. "The doctor says you can be discharged today, if you're feeling up to it. I can take you to where we're keeping your vehicle." 2 hours later, I stood in the county impound lot, staring at our SUV. It was exactly as the sheriff had described. Parked haphazardly, both front doors open, keys in the ignition. Sarah's purse was on the passenger seat, her phone beside it. "This doesn't make sense," I said again, more to myself than to the sheriff. "I remember driving away." Sheriff Daniels watched me with a mixture of concern and suspicion. "Mr. Hill, I need to ask you directly. Did something happen between you and Sarah at that overlook? Something you're not telling me?" The implication was clear. In the sheriff's mind, I was a suspect, not a victim. "No," I said firmly. "I would never hurt Sarah. Never." "Then how do you explain this?" He gestured to the abandoned vehicle. "I can't," I admitted. "Unless?" "Unless what?" I hesitated. The truth would sound insane, but a partial truth might help. "Unless someone, or something, is playing with my memories," I said, "making me see things that didn't happen, making me forget things that did." Sheriff Daniels studied me for a long moment. "Mr. Hill, I'm going to be straight with you. Right now, I don't have enough evidence to hold you, but until we find Sarah Wilson, or find out what happened to her, this investigation remains open." I nodded numbly. "You're free to go," he continued, "but I'll need you to stay in the area, and I'll need to interview you again, probably several times." "I understand," I said, "but I want to help search for her. Please." The sheriff considered this, then nodded slowly. "We're organizing another search tomorrow. You can join one of the teams, but you'll be with a deputy at all times. Understood?" "Yes, thank you." That night, in a cheap motel room paid for with my emergency credit card, I tried to make sense of everything that had happened. Had any of it been real? The lake? The creature? The cabin? Or had I experienced some kind of psychotic break? I picked up Sarah's phone, which the sheriff had allowed me to take. It was locked, but I knew her password. Her mother's birthday. Inside, I found our text history, photos of us together, all the digital evidence of our relationship. Sarah had been real, was real, but then what had happened at the overlook? Why couldn't I remember? Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of dark water and faces that melted and reformed. I woke repeatedly, each time half expecting to find myself back at the lake, or in Frank's cabin, or in some new illusion created by the creature. But morning came, and I was still in the motel, still in the real world, or what I desperately hoped was the real world. The search began at the scenic overlook where our SUV had been found. Teams of volunteers and officers spread out through the rugged terrain, calling Sarah's name, looking for any sign of her. I was paired with a young deputy named Rodriguez, who watched me with barely disguised suspicion as we hiked through the Badlands. "So, you really don't remember what happened here?" he asked as we approached the overlook. "No," I admitted. "My memories don't make sense. They don't match what Sheriff Daniels told me." Rodriguez nodded, as if this confirmed something. "People get strange out here sometimes. The isolation, the heat, the way the light plays off the rocks, makes them see things that aren't there." I glanced at him. "You believe me?" He shrugged. "I believe you believe it. Whether it's what actually happened." He let the sentence hang. We continued searching, moving in a grid pattern away from the overlook. The sun beat down mercilessly as we hiked through the Badlands, the landscape a surreal mixture of eroded buttes, flat-topped mesas, and twisted junipers clinging to rocky slopes. By mid-afternoon, we'd found nothing. No footprints, no torn clothing, no sign that Sarah had ever been there. My frustration mounted with each passing hour, along with the creeping fear that I would never find her. "We should head back," Rodriguez said as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. "It'll be dark soon, and this isn't terrain you want to be caught in after sunset." I wanted to protest, to insist we keep searching, but exhaustion was setting in. "One more ridge," I bargained. "Let's just check over that rise and then we can go back." Rodriguez sighed but nodded. We climbed the steep slope, loose shale sliding beneath our boots. At the top, I stood catching my breath, surveying the view before us, and froze. There, nestled in a small valley perhaps half a mile away, was a lake, dark, still surrounded by cottonwoods, exactly as I remembered. "Do you see that?" I asked, pointing. Rodriguez followed my gaze. "See what?" "The lake, right there." I pointed more emphatically. He frowned. "There's no lake there, man, just more Badlands." "It's right there," I insisted, my voice rising. "How can you not see it?" Rodriguez keyed his radio. "Sheriff, I'm with Hill on the North Ridge. He's saying he sees a lake, but there's nothing there." "That's not possible," I said, staring at the scene before me. "It's right there." I started down the slope, determined to prove what I was seeing was real. Rodriguez called after me, then cursed and followed. As I descended toward the valley, the lake remained clearly visible to me, its surface reflecting the late afternoon sun, the cottonwoods swaying slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. But with each step closer, an uneasy feeling grew in my gut. Something was wrong with the way the light played on the water, with the too-perfect stillness of the trees. About halfway down the slope, Rodriguez caught up to me, grabbing my arm. "Hill, stop! There's nothing down there but rocks and scrub." I looked again, and for a split second I saw what he saw. A barren valley, no water, no trees. Then my vision seemed to waver and the lake was back, more vivid than before. "I can see it," I whispered. "But you can't." Rodriguez's expression changed from annoyance to concern. "Let's go back, okay? You need rest." "No." I pulled free of his grip. "Sarah's down there. I know it." I continued down the slope more carefully now, aware that what I was seeing might not be physically real. But if the lake had called to me specifically, shown itself only to me, then maybe Sarah was still there, still trapped by the creature. When I reached the valley floor, the illusion, if that's what it was, became more detailed. I could smell the water now, feel the cooler air near its shore. The cottonwoods rustled, though the air around me remained still. "Sarah," I called, moving toward what looked to me like the lake's edge. "Sarah, are you here?" Rodriguez stood a few yards back, watching me with open alarm as I apparently walked through empty air, calling a missing woman's name. I reached the shore, what appeared to me to be the shore, and stopped. The water was exactly as I remembered it, unnaturally still, reflecting the sky like a perfect mirror. Standing at its edge, I sensed, rather than saw a presence beneath the surface, something vast and ancient watching me. "Give her back," I said, my voice low but firm. "Whatever you are, whatever you want, just give Sarah back to me." The surface of the lake remained undisturbed, but I felt a change in the air around me, a heaviness, like the pressure before a storm. "Hill," Rodriguez called from behind me. "Who are you talking to? There's nothing there." I ignored him, focused entirely on the lake. "I know you're real," I continued. "I know what you can do, but Sarah is real too, and she doesn't belong to you." The water began to ripple, though there was no wind. The ripples grew, gathered, formed a pattern that might have been words written in a language I couldn't read. Then they coalesced, rising into a column that took shape as I watched. Sarah emerged from the water, just as Frank had done in my memory or hallucination. She walked toward me across the surface of the lake, water streaming from her form but never diminishing it. Her features were perfect, too perfect, like a wax figure modeled after the real thing. "Tim," she said, her voice exactly as I remembered. "You came back for me." Behind me, Rodriguez was saying something, his voice urgent, but I couldn't make out the words over the rushing in my ears. "You're not Sarah," I said. "Where is she? The real Sarah?" The thing wearing Sarah's shape tilted its head, the movement too fluid to be human. "But I am Sarah now. Part of her is in me, as I told you before. Her memories, her voice, her face." "No," I said, shaking my head. "The real Sarah. The woman I love." "Love?" The creature seemed to consider this, the word rolling off its tongue as if testing an unfamiliar food. "Yes, she felt that for you. It was strong in her memories. An attachment. A bond." "Where is she?" I demanded again. The Sarah thing smiled, an expression that didn't reach its eyes. "She is here." It gestured to itself. "And nowhere. Time works differently in my domain, as I told you. What seems like days to you has been longer for her." A terrible understanding dawned. "You've already absorbed her," I whispered. "She's gone." "Not gone," it corrected. "Changed. As you will be, as all who enter my domain eventually are." I felt something break inside me. Hope, perhaps, or whatever remnant of denial had been keeping me functioning. Sarah was gone. Had been gone, perhaps from the moment we'd followed the false ranger's directions to this place. "Why?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Why do this? Why us?" The creature regarded me curiously. "Why does the wolf hunt the deer? Why does the hawk take the mouse? It is simply what I am, what I have always been." "No," I said, anger suddenly replacing despair. "The wolf hunts because it's hungry. The hawk feeds its young. They kill to survive. This, what you do, this is something else. This is cruelty for its own sake." The thing wearing Sarah's face seemed genuinely puzzled. "Cruelty? I give immortality. The memories, the voices, the faces, they live on through me, through the echoes I create." "That's not immortality," I said. "That's theft. You steal lives, you steal souls." For a moment the creature was silent, its expression unreadable. Then, "Perhaps, but it changes nothing. You have returned to my domain willingly. You have seen me with your true sight. The cycle must complete." It took a step toward me, then another. As it moved, its form began to change, Sarah's features melting away to reveal what lay beneath. A writhing darkness shot through with points of light like stars in a midnight sky. I backed away but found my feet suddenly rooted to the ground. Looking down, I saw water rising around my ankles, though I stood on what appeared to be dry land. The water climbed higher, past my knees, my waist, cold as death and thick as oil. "You cannot escape," the creature said, its voice no longer Sarah's but a chorus of every voice it had ever stolen. None ever have. Panic seized me. I struggled against the invisible bonds holding me, called out for Rodriguez, for anyone. but my voice made no sound. The creature reached me, its form now barely humanoid, a swirling void contained within a roughly person-shaped outline. It reached out with what might have been hands, placing them on either side of my face. The touch burned cold, and I could feel something flowing from its substance into mine, the same liquid darkness I'd felt when the Sarah thing had touched me in the car. "No," I gasped, the word barely audible even to my own ears. "Accept," the chorus of voices urged. "Become." The darkness spread beneath my skin, a cold fire racing through my veins. My vision began to blur, the world around me distorting as if viewed through warped glass. In that moment of desperation, a memory surfaced, something carved into the wall of the cabin in the forest. "The lake isn't real. Nothing is real once you enter." The lake wasn't real. The creature wasn't real, at least not in the way physical things were real. It existed in some other state, some halfway place between imagination and reality. And if it wasn't real in the conventional sense, maybe it could be fought with unconventional means. I closed my eyes, shutting out the sight of the creature before me. Concentrating with every ounce of will I possessed, I focused on a single thought. This isn't real. The lake isn't real. You aren't real. The cold fire in my veins hesitated, slowed. The pressure of the creature's touch on my face diminished slightly. Encouraged, I pushed harder. "You have no power over me. You exist because I see you. I don't believe in you." A sound like wind through a canyon filled my ears. The creature's response, perhaps, though not in any language I could understand. "I don't believe in you," I thought again, with all the conviction I could muster. "Sarah is gone, but you won't take me too. You aren't real." The pressure on my face vanished. The cold fire retreated from my veins. I felt the water around me recede. I opened my eyes to find myself alone in the barren valley. No lake, no trees, no creature in sight. Just rocks and scrub and the setting sun casting long shadows across the Badlands. A few yards away, Rodriguez was on his radio, his expression a mixture of alarm and confusion. Behaving erratically, talking to thin air, some kind of breakdown. Request immediate assistance. He broke off as he saw me looking at him. "Hill, you back with us?" I nodded slowly, unsure myself of what had just happened. Had I finally lost my grip on reality? Or had I found it at last? "I'm okay," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I think it's over now." Rodriguez approached cautiously. "What's over? What just happened to you?" I shook my head. How could I possibly explain? "I don't know, but I think I understand now. About Sarah." His expression softened slightly. "Let's get you back, okay? It's getting dark." As we hiked back to the rendezvous point, I tried to process everything I'd experienced. The creature, the echo, the lone man, whatever it was, had claimed to have absorbed Sarah, that she was changed, not gone. But if the creature existed in some halfway place between imagination and reality, perhaps Sarah did too now. Not gone entirely, but not present in the physical world either. I would never be able to prove what had happened to her. Never be able to explain it to the authorities in a way that wouldn't sound like the ravings of a madman or the lies of a guilty conscience. Sarah Wilson would become another unsolved disappearance, another mystery of the Badlands. But I would know, and I would carry the memory of her, the real her, not the echo, for both of us. After a debriefing at the sheriff's station, during which I stuck to a story about becoming disoriented and having what I described as a stress hallucination, I was released with a warning to seek professional help and to remain available for further questioning. I checked into the same motel, exhausted beyond measure but strangely calm. The terror that had gripped me for days was gone, replaced by a profound sadness but also a kind of resolution. That night, I dreamed of Sarah. Not the perfect, too-still imitation the creature had created, but the real Sarah, with her quick laugh and the small scar above her left eyebrow that she'd gotten falling off a bike as a child. In the dream, we were back at the party where we'd met, standing on the balcony as the sun rose. "It wasn't your fault," she said, her hand warm in mine. "You couldn't have known." "I should have listened when you said something felt wrong about that place," I replied. "I'm so sorry, Sarah." She smiled, a little sad but genuine. "Some things you can't escape, Tim. Some stories are already written before they begin." "Will I see you again?" I asked as the dream began to fade. "I'm part of something else now," she said. "Something I don't fully understand, but I'm not gone. Not completely. Just echoing." I woke with tears on my face, but a strange peace in my heart. I would never fully understand what had happened in the Badlands, never be able to prove my experience to anyone else. But I knew what I had seen, what I had felt, and I knew Sarah was out there, somewhere, in some form. Maybe someday I would find her again, or maybe she would find me. Until then, I would carry her memory, her true memory, keeping it safe from the thing that had tried to claim her, to wear her like a costume. I left North Dakota the next day after one final interview with Sheriff Daniels. He didn't believe my sanitized version of events, I could tell, but he had no evidence to hold me. Sarah's disappearance would remain an open case, one of many mysteries of the Badlands. As I drove east, putting distance between myself and Little Missouri National Grassland, I kept the radio off, the windows down, listening only to the sound of the wind. Occasionally, I thought I heard a voice in that wind, Sarah's voice calling my name in the distance. An echo, perhaps, or something more. My name is Timothy Hill, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Little Missouri National Grassland in North Dakota, just last summer, and sometimes on quiet nights when I'm alone, I still hear the echoes calling. My name is Timothy Hill, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of the Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota, during what should have been a peaceful weekend hiking trip with my German Shepherd, Rusty. I've always been drawn to solitude. After my divorce last year, these escapes into nature became my therapy. Just me, Rusty, and the vast emptiness of the wilderness. The park's north unit is less visited than the south, which is exactly why I chose it. I wanted to hike the Caprock Coulee Trail and then venture off into the backcountry areas near the Little Missouri River where permits are required and few travelers dare to go. April in North Dakota can be unpredictable. Still cold enough for frost at night, but the days had been getting warmer. The forecast showed clear skies, perfect for the 3-day trek I had planned. I'd packed light but thoroughly. My one-person tent, sleeping bag rated for below freezing, enough dehydrated meals, water purification tablets, first aid supplies, and other essentials. Rusty carried his own small pack with his food and collapsible bowls. As I parked at the trailhead near Oxbow Overlook, the sun was just beginning to rise over the Badlands. The rugged beauty of the place always took my breath away. Spires of eroded earth rising from the plains like ancient monuments, the Little Missouri winding its way through the valley below, and the whispering pines that gave this particular area its nickname among locals. The visitor center had been closed when I arrived, but I'd secured my backcountry permit online and left my itinerary with the Park Service as required. Ready for an adventure, boy? I scratched behind Rusty's ears as he wagged his tail excitedly. At 5 years old, he was in his prime, strong, alert, and the best companion I could ask for. His warm brown eyes looked up at me with absolute trust that sometimes made my heart ache. We set off down the trail, the morning air crisp and clean in my lungs. For the first few hours, everything was perfect. We passed a few day hikers on the established trails, but by early afternoon, after taking the turnoff toward the backcountry, we hadn't seen another soul for hours, just the way I liked it. The first sign that something was off came around 4 p.m. Rusty, who had been trotting happily ahead of me, suddenly stopped. His ears perked forward, body rigid with alertness. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, instantly on guard. Rusty was rarely spooked without reason. He growled low in his throat, the fur along his spine rising. I scanned the area, thinking perhaps it was a bison, or maybe even a mountain lion, both known to inhabit the park, but there was nothing visible in the sparse woodland surrounding us. "It's okay," I soothed, though I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. After another minute of tense silence, Rusty seemed to relax, though he stayed closer to my side than before. We continued our hike, following the route I'd mapped that would take us to a secluded camping spot near Squaw Creek. The landscape gradually changed as we descended into a more densely wooded area. Unusual for the Badlands, but this particular pocket of the park was known for its stands of juniper and ponderosa pine. By the time we reached our planned camping spot, the sun was beginning to set. I quickly set up the tent, gathered wood for a small fire, and prepared our dinner. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped rapidly. I built the fire higher, grateful for its warmth and light. Rusty wouldn't settle. He kept pacing around our campsite, occasionally stopping to stare intently into the darkness beyond the firelight. I tried to dismiss it as wildlife scents, perhaps deer or smaller nocturnal creatures, but his behavior was making me increasingly uneasy. "What's out there, Rusty?" I murmured, straining to hear anything unusual. The woods were quiet. Too quiet, I realized. No chirping insects or rustling of small animals. Just the crackling of our fire and the occasional whisper of wind through the pines. That's when I first heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound from somewhere in the darkness. Not quite footsteps, more like something being dragged slowly across the forest floor. Then it stopped. I reached for my flashlight and shone it in the direction of the sound. The beam cut through the darkness between the trees but revealed nothing unusual. Rusty growled again, deeper this time, moving to position himself between me and whatever had made the noise. "Hello," I called out. Immediately regretting breaking the silence. "Is someone there?" No response, but the dragging sound came again, closer now, followed by what could have been a whisper, so faint I couldn't be sure I'd actually heard it. I'm not easily frightened. I'd spent countless nights alone in the wilderness, but something about this felt wrong on a primal level. I fed more wood to the fire, building it higher, and pulled out my hunting knife, more for comfort than any practical purpose. "It's probably nothing, Rusty," I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. "Let's get some sleep." But sleep didn't come easily. Inside the tent, with Rusty curled against me, I lay awake, listening. The dragging sound came and went throughout the night, always seeming to circle our campsite but never coming closer than the edge of where the firelight reached. Sometime past midnight, I could have sworn I heard a voice, not quite human, calling my name from the darkness. It was impossible, of course. No one out here knew my name. I must have finally drifted off because I woke with a start to the sound of Rusty's frantic barking. It was dawn, the faintest light filtering through the tent fabric. Rusty was at the entrance, hackles raised, barking at something outside. I unzipped the tent and peered out. The fire had died to embers, and a thick mist hung between the trees. And there, not 20 feet from our campsite, stood a figure. At first glance, it appeared to be a woman, tall and thin, wearing what looked like a long, tattered dress. But as she turned slightly toward me, I felt my blood run cold. Her proportions were wrong somehow, limbs too long and jointed in places they shouldn't be, her neck craned at an impossible angle. Rusty's barking reached a fever pitch, but he wouldn't leave the tent. I fumbled for my phone to take a picture, a ridiculous instinct in retrospect, but when I looked back up, the figure was gone. Just gone. Not walking away or running, simply no longer there. "Did you see that?" I whispered to Rusty, who was still growling but had quieted somewhat. Of course he couldn't answer, but his behavior confirmed I hadn't imagined it. I should have packed up and left immediately. Every survival instinct was screaming at me to get out of these woods, but the rational part of my brain was already making excuses. It was just a hiker, distorted by the morning mist. Or maybe I was still half asleep and had imagined it entirely. So, instead of leaving, I rekindled the fire, made coffee, and tried to shake off the unease that had settled into my bones. We had 2 more days planned out here, and I wasn't going to let some trick of the light ruin my trip. After breakfast, we continued our hike, following the course of Squaw Creek deeper into the backcountry. The day was clear and sunny, and with each passing hour, the encounter of the morning seemed less real, more like a fragment of a nightmare that dissolves in daylight. We reached a beautiful overlook around noon, where the creek tumbled down a series of small waterfalls into a crystal-clear pool. It was a perfect spot for lunch. As Rusty drank from the creek, I pulled out my map to check our progress. That's when I noticed it. The map didn't look right. The trails and landmarks were where they should be, but some of the labels and distances seemed off. Places I knew were miles apart appeared nearly on top of each other. And there, marked in the middle of an area I knew to be empty badlands, was a small black dot labeled Whispering Pine Settlement. I frowned, turning the map over to check the publication date. It was the same map I'd been using for years, purchased directly from the Park Service. But I'd never noticed this settlement marked before, and I'd studied this map dozens of times. As I puzzled over this discrepancy, Rusty suddenly stopped drinking and lifted his head, ears alert. Following his gaze across the pool, I saw a man standing on the opposite bank, watching us. He was lean and weathered, dressed in what looked like hunting clothes, though not modern ones, more like something from 100 years ago. A long rifle was slung casually over his shoulder. "Hello there," I called, raising a hand in greeting. The hiker's code: always acknowledge fellow travelers. The man didn't respond or return my wave. He just stood there, staring. Something about his stillness was unnerving. Rusty began to growl again. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I tried again, standing up slowly. The man tilted his head slightly as if considering my words. Then, in a voice that sounded like it hadn't been used in years, he said, "You shouldn't be here. Timothy." My blood froze. How did he know my name? "What did you say?" I managed to ask. "This ain't your land," the man continued, his voice clearer now but still wrong somehow, like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The Pines don't want you here." Before I could respond, he turned and walked into the trees. I blinked, and he was gone. "Hey, wait," I called, but there was no response. I quickly packed up my things, suddenly eager to be moving again. Rusty seemed to share my sentiment, staying close to my side as we continued our hike. The encounter had left me deeply unsettled. Not just the man's knowledge of my name, but something about him had seemed off. Like the woman thing I'd glimpsed that morning, as if they were both somehow not quite real. I checked my phone. No service, of course, but I'd expected that. The GPS app I used for backup navigation wasn't working either, which was unusual. The screen showed only a spinning loading icon, as if it couldn't determine our location. With no choice but to rely on my possibly incorrect map, I decided to adjust our route. Instead of continuing deeper into the backcountry as planned, we would circuit back toward the main trail, though still camping one more night as we made our way out. As we hiked through the afternoon, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being followed. Rusty felt it too. He kept looking back, growling softly. Several times I stopped and turned around quickly, hoping to catch sight of whoever or whatever might be trailing us. But I saw nothing except the silent trees and rock formations. By late afternoon, we reached a different area suitable for camping, a small clearing on a rise above the creek. I wanted somewhere with good visibility in all directions, not hemmed in by trees like our previous site. As I set up camp, I noticed Rusty digging frantically at the edge of the clearing. "Rusty, stop that," I called, but he ignored me, unusual for him. I walked over and pulled him away from the hole he'd started. "What's gotten into you, boy?" That's when I saw what he'd uncovered. A small bundle of twigs bound together with what looked like human hair, with small animal bones and teeth woven into the binding. It looked like some kind of crude doll or fetish. I recoiled instinctively, letting it fall back into the dirt. "What the hell?" Rusty whined, pawing at the ground near it. Curious despite my disgust, I used a stick to uncover more of the area. There wasn't just one bundle. There were dozens of them, buried in a rough circle around the entire clearing. Our campsite was at the center of this circle. "We're not staying here," I said firmly to Rusty, who seemed vastly relieved as I hastily repacked our gear. The sun was getting low, but I was determined to put as much distance as possible between us and that clearing before dark. We headed back toward the creek, following it downstream in hopes of finding another suitable campsite. The light was failing fast, and I was beginning to worry we'd be caught without shelter when we came upon a small cabin tucked against a rocky outcropping. It wasn't marked on my map, but it looked like an old ranger station or perhaps a historical restoration of a settler's cabin. Normally, I'd never enter a structure in the backcountry without permission, but as the first drops of unexpected rain began to fall and the wind picked up, it seemed like our best option. If it was park property, they would understand the emergency use. If it was private, I'd leave compensation for the intrusion. The cabin was small but solidly built, with a covered porch extending across the front. The door was unlocked, not unusual for backcountry structures, which often serve as emergency shelters. Inside was a single room containing a rough table, 2 chairs, a small cast-iron stove, and a narrow bed frame with no mattress. It was shelter, though, and dry. I lit my lantern and looked around more carefully. There were no personal belongings visible, nothing to indicate recent habitation. A thick layer of dust covered everything, disturbed only by the tracks of small animals. "Looks like no one's been here in years," I told Rusty, who was sniffing every corner of the cabin suspiciously. "We'll be fine for tonight." I unrolled my sleeping bag on the bare bed frame, gathered wood from a stack on the porch, and got a small fire going in the stove. Outside, the light rain had turned into a downpour, with occasional rumbles of thunder. We'd been lucky to find this place. After feeding Rusty and eating a quick meal myself, I tried the GPS app again. Still nothing. My regular compass was working, at least, so I could navigate out in the morning if needed. As I was checking my gear, I noticed something carved into the wooden wall beside the bed. Names and dates, dozens of them, presumably from previous occupants of the cabin. Most were old, dating back decades. I ran my fingers over the rough engravings, reading the names. John Erickson, 1932. M. Sue Williams, 1947. The Carters, 1968. But then my hand froze on a newer-looking carving. Timothy Hill, 2025. My name. This year. But I'd never been to this cabin before. Never carved my name here or anywhere in the park. I stumbled back from the wall, my heart pounding. It was a coincidence. It had to be. Hill was a common surname. Timothy not unusual. It must be some other Timothy Hill. Rusty whined, sensing my distress. I knelt beside him, running my hand through his fur to calm us both. "It's nothing, boy. Just a weird coincidence." But deep down, I didn't believe that. First, the strange woman, then the man who knew my name, the fetish bundles in the clearing, and now this. Something was deeply wrong in these woods. I checked the door again, making sure it was securely latched, though there was no lock. For additional security, I wedged one of the chairs under the doorknob, a flimsy barricade, but better than nothing. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion eventually overcame fear. I drifted off with Rusty curled at my feet, the sound of rain on the roof and the occasional crackle from the stove, the only noises breaking the silence. I woke to Rusty's growling. The cabin was pitch black, my lantern had gone out, and the fire in the stove had died to embers that gave almost no light. How long had I been asleep? My watch said 3:17 a.m. Rusty was standing at the foot of the bed, facing the door, every muscle in his body tense. The chair I'd wedged under the doorknob was still in place, but there was a sound coming from outside. That same dragging noise I'd heard the previous night, circling the cabin now. Then came a gentle knock on the door. 3 soft taps, almost polite. Rusty's growl deepened. I reached for my flashlight but found it missing from where I'd left it. Another knock, slightly louder. Then a voice, the same voice as the man by the creek, but somehow changed, distorted. "Timothy," it called softly. "Let me in, Timothy. It's cold out here." My throat was too dry to respond, even if I'd wanted to. The doorknob rattled gently, testing the chair barricade. "I know you're in there, Timothy. I can smell you. I can smell your fear." The voice was changing as it spoke, becoming less human with each word. By the end, it sounded like multiple voices speaking in unison. Men, women, and something else I couldn't identify. "The pines are hungry, Timothy. They've been waiting for you." I fumbled in the dark for my hunting knife, gripping it so tightly my knuckles ached. "This land isn't for your kind anymore," the voices continued. "It belongs to older things now, things that were here before, things that will be here after." A new sound joined the voice, a scratching on the walls of the cabin like dozens of sets of claws or fingernails dragging across the wood. It started at the door, then spread until it seemed to come from every direction at once. Walls, roof, even beneath the floorboards. Rusty was barking frantically now, spinning in circles as he tried to face every threat at once. I slid off the bed and crouched on the floor, knife ready, though what good it would do against whatever was out there, I couldn't say. "Your dog knows," the voices whispered, now sounding like they were coming from inside the cabin, though the door remained closed. "Animals always know. They can see us as we truly are." "What do you want?" I finally managed to ask, my voice cracking. The scratching stopped abruptly. For a long moment, there was absolute silence. Then, "We want you to join us, Timothy. All who enter the Whispering Pines must join us. It's been so long since we had someone new." A pale, thin hand slid through a gap in the wallboards, impossibly thin, with too many joints in the fingers. It beckoned once, then withdrew. I scrambled away, pulling Rusty with me to the furthest corner of the cabin. The dog was trembling violently, pressed against my side. "Leave us alone," I shouted, finding my courage in desperate fear. "Get away from here." A sound like laughter, multiple voices again but distorted, like it was coming through water or from a great distance. "You came to us, Timothy. You sought the solitude of the pines, and the pines accepted your offering." "I didn't offer anything," I protested, though a sick feeling was growing in my stomach. "Oh, but you did," the voices replied. "Your pain, your loneliness, your broken marriage, the hollow space inside you that you try to fill with these wilderness excursions. That emptiness called to us. The pines heard it like a song. How could they know about my divorce, about my private pain? And now we will fill that emptiness, Timothy. We will make you whole again." The scratching resumed, more frantic now, and I could hear wood splintering. They were breaking through. In a burst of desperate energy, I grabbed my backpack, clipped Rusty's leash to his collar, and made for the door. Whatever was out there, facing it seemed better than being trapped in this cabin as it was torn apart around us. I kicked the chair away from the door and yanked it open. The porch was empty. The rain had stopped, and a full moon illuminated the clearing in front of the cabin. Nothing moved in the silvery light. I stepped outside cautiously, Rusty pressed against my leg. The scratching had stopped the moment I opened the door. "Hello?" I called, hating how weak my voice sounded. No response, just the gentle rustle of pine needles in the breeze. I turned to examine the exterior walls of the cabin and froze. By moonlight, I could clearly see hundreds of deep scratches in the wood. Fresh ones, the pale inner wood exposed where the weather-darkened surface had been torn away. Some of the scratches formed crude symbols I didn't recognize. Others almost looked like words in an alphabet I couldn't read. and there, scratched largest of all across the door I had just walked through, was my full name: Timothy James Hill. That was enough. I wasn't spending another minute near this place. I tightened my grip on Rusty's leash, turned on my headlamp, and plunged into the trees, heading roughly east where I knew the main trail must be. We moved as quickly as we could through the night-dark forest, guided only by my headlamp and the occasional glimpse of stars through the canopy. Rusty pulled at the leash, eager to put distance between us and the cabin. I had no idea how far we had to go to reach the trail. Without a working GPS or accurate map, I was navigating by instinct and the knowledge that if we kept heading east, we would eventually hit the main north-south trail or the park road beyond. After what felt like hours of walking, but was probably only 45 minutes, we crested a small rise, and there below us was a village, or what remained of one. In a small valley, illuminated by moonlight, stood a cluster of maybe a dozen buildings, old wooden structures in various states of decay. Some were missing roofs, others had collapsed walls. At the center stood what might have been a church at one point, its steeple listing dangerously to one side. It wasn't on my map. It wasn't supposed to be here, but I recognized it immediately from the label I'd seen earlier: Whispering Pine Settlement. "This isn't possible," I whispered. There were no ruined settlements inside the national park. Any historical structures would have been either restored or removed long ago. Yet here it was, looking like it had been abandoned for a century or more, and it was directly in our path east. I considered circling around it, but that would mean more time in these woods that suddenly felt so hostile. The most direct route was through the settlement. And maybe, just maybe, in daylight it would prove to be nothing more than an old ranger station or maintenance area that my fear-addled mind had exaggerated into something more sinister. We descended carefully into the valley. As we got closer to the buildings, I could see they were even older than I'd first thought. The architectural style reminded me of photographs I'd seen of frontier settlements from the late 1800s. We entered what would have been the main street, just a wider dirt path between two rows of decrepit buildings. Everything was still and silent. No wildlife sounds, no rustling of leaves, not even the whisper of wind that gave the settlement its name. Rusty's hackles were up, his body tense against the leash. It was clear he wanted no part of this place, and I was inclined to agree. We quickened our pace, moving down the center of the dirt path, trying not to look too closely at the dark windows of the buildings we passed. We were about halfway through the settlement when I heard it. A child's laugh, coming from inside what looked like it had been a general store. The sound was so unexpected, so normal in this abnormal place, that I stopped in my tracks. "Hello?" I called, immediately regretting it. "Is someone there?" The laughter came again. Definitely a young child. Then a small voice, "Come play with me." It was surely impossible for a child to be out here alone in an abandoned settlement in the middle of the night. Every instinct told me to keep walking, to ignore it. But what if, against all odds, there actually was a lost child? "Who's there?" I called again, stepping cautiously toward the building. "Are you alone? Are you hurt?" Rusty resisted, pulling back on the leash with a strength that surprised me. He never behaved this way. "It's okay, boy," I soothed, though I wasn't sure if it was. "We just need to check." The front of the old store had mostly collapsed, leaving a jagged opening where the entrance would have been. I directed my headlamp beam inside, illuminating the dusty interior. Ancient shelving units lined the walls, empty except for a few broken bottles and rusted cans. And there, at the back of the store, stood a small figure. A little girl in what looked like an old-fashioned dress, her back to me. "Hey there," I said softly, not wanting to frighten her. "Are you lost? Where are your parents?" The girl didn't turn around. She just stood there, perfectly still. I took a step into the building, glass and debris crunching under my boot. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Timothy. This is my dog, Rusty." At the mention of his name, Rusty let out a growl that I'd never heard from him before, deep and threatening. He was straining against the leash now, trying to pull me back out to the street. The girl finally moved, but not to turn around. Instead, her head rotated, just her head, while her body remained facing away from me. It turned much farther than any human neck should allow, until she was looking directly at me over her shoulder. Her face was wrong. It looked almost like a child's face, but the proportions were off. The eyes too large and spaced too far apart, the mouth stretching wider than it should. And her eyes reflected my headlamp's beam the way an animal's would, glowing yellow-green in the darkness. "Timothy," she said, her voice suddenly deeper, adult-like. "You've come to join us after all." I stumbled backward, nearly falling over Rusty, who was now barking frantically. The girl's body began to turn, slowly and jerkily, like a puppet being manipulated by an unskilled hand. As she fully faced me, I could see her dress was tattered and stained dark with what could only be long-dried blood. "We've been waiting for you," she said, taking a step toward me, her movements still jerky and wrong. "Everyone who enters the Pines must join us eventually. That's the rule." I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and ran, Rusty beside me, tearing down the main street toward the far end of the settlement. Behind us came the sound of laughter again. But now it was multiple voices, adults and children, echoing from every building we passed. Doors began to open. Windows that had been empty now framed faces, pale, distorted faces with too wide smiles and reflective eyes. They were emerging from every building, dozens of them, dressed in clothing from different eras, some that looked centuries old, others more modern. "Join us, Timothy," they called in unison, their voices creating a terrible harmony that seemed to vibrate in my bones. "The Pines are hungry." We reached the end of the street and kept running, up the slope on the far side of the valley, away from the settlement. I didn't look back until we'd reached the top of the rise. When I did, the entire settlement was dark and still again. No movement, no figures in the street or watching from windows. Just abandoned buildings in the moonlight. But the voices continued, carried on the wind that suddenly whipped around us. "You can run, Timothy Hill, but the Pines know your name now. The Pines will find you." We ran until exhaustion forced us to stop. By then, the sky was beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn. We'd reached a stream, not Squaw Creek, but another waterway I didn't recognize. Rusty immediately began lapping at the water. I checked my watch, 5:43 a.m. We'd been moving for over 2 hours. As the light grew stronger, I took stock of our situation. My backpack contained enough supplies for at least another day. The compass now seemed to be working again, showing east clearly. And in the growing daylight, the horrors of the night began to feel less immediate, though no less real. I scanned our surroundings and noticed something that made my heart leap. A trail marker, partially hidden by brush, but unmistakably a park service sign. We'd found a trail. According to the marker, we were on the lower Paddock Creek Trail, which I knew eventually connected to the park's main road. We were still miles from my car, but at least now we were on a marked path. As we followed the trail, the morning sun continued to rise, illuminating a landscape that looked perfectly normal in daylight. Beautiful, even. Birds were singing, insects buzzing, nothing like the unnatural silence of the night before. By mid-morning, we reached a trail junction with a large map display. I eagerly approached it, hoping to pinpoint our exact location and the fastest route back to the parking area. The map showed the standard park trails, including the one we were on, but there was no indication of the Whispering Pines settlement. According to this official map, nothing existed in the area where I'd seen those buildings, just unmarked backcountry. As I studied the map, trying to reconcile what I'd seen with what was marked, I heard voices. Human voices. Normal ones. Coming up the trail. A group of day hikers rounded the bend, 3 men and 2 women in their 20s or early 30s, chatting cheerfully. They looked surprised to see me, probably because of my haggard appearance. I hadn't slept properly in 2 nights. My clothes were dirty and torn in places, and I probably had a wild look in my eyes. "Hey there," one of the men called. "You okay? You look like you've had a rough time of it." For a moment, I considered telling them everything. The strange woman, the man who knew my name, the cabin, the settlement. But looking at their friendly, concerned faces, I knew how it would sound. They'd think I was delirious from dehydration or suffering from some kind of psychological break. "I'm fine," I managed, forcing a smile. "Just got a bit turned around yesterday. Spent an uncomfortable night, but we're heading out now." "Where are you parked?" one of the women asked. "We're heading back to the North Unit Visitor Center if you need to walk with us." The visitor center wasn't far from my car. "That would be great, actually. Thanks." As we walked together, they introduced themselves, a group of friends from Bismarck who came to the park regularly. They chatted easily about their hike, about the weather, about normal things that suddenly seemed precious in their mundanity. I let their conversation wash over me, responding when appropriate, but mostly just grateful for their presence. Rusty, too, seemed relieved to be around other people, walking calmly beside me without his earlier tension. We reached the visitor center around noon. My car was right where I'd left it, a wonderfully normal sight. I thanked the group for their company and promised to be more careful with my route planning in the future. As they walked away, one of them, Mike, I think he'd said his name was, turned back. "Hey, I meant to ask," he said. "Where exactly were you camping? We know most of the backcountry spots around here." I hesitated, then pointed vaguely in the direction we'd come from. "Over near Squaw Creek." Mike frowned slightly. "Huh. Be careful if you go back there. There's an area locals call the Whispering Pines that has a bad reputation." My blood ran cold. "What kind of reputation?" He shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "Just old stories. People going missing over the years. Strange sounds. Probably just coyotes and the wind in the trees, but, well, some places just feel wrong, you know? That's one of them." Before I could ask more, his friends called for him to catch up, and he waved goodbye, jogging after them. I stood there for a long moment, watching them go. Then I loaded Rusty into the car, threw my gear in the back, and drove away from Theodore Roosevelt National Park as fast as legally possible. That was 3 weeks ago. I've tried to convince myself that what happened was some combination of sleep deprivation, isolation, and an overactive imagination. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know the pines whispered my name. Last night I woke at exactly 3:17 a.m. to the sound of something scratching at my bedroom window. A gentle, rhythmic sound like fingernails on glass. When I finally gathered the courage to look, there was nothing there except a single pine branch that shouldn't have been possible. My apartment is on the 3rd floor, and there are no trees close enough to touch the building. Rusty saw it too. He hasn't stopped growling at the window since. I think the pines have found me, and they're hungry. Last night I found another bundle of twigs and hair outside my apartment door, identical to those buried around the clearing in the park. I've tried calling the Park Service to ask about the Whispering Pines settlement, about any historical records or legends. The rangers I've spoken to either claim ignorance or quickly change the subject, except for one, an older ranger named Harlan, who's been with the park for over 30 years. He called me back after hours, speaking in hushed tones. "Don't go looking for those answers, son," he said. "Some things in those badlands are better left alone. Those pines, they weren't always there. They grew after something happened. Something bad." When I pressed him for details, he sighed deeply. There was a settlement there in the 1890s. Small place, just a few families trying to make a living in unforgiving country. Winter of 1897 was brutal. Worst in living memory. They were cut off, starving. The official report says they all died of exposure or starvation. "But you don't believe that," I said, already knowing the answer. The search party that found them in spring, well, my grandfather was part of it. He never spoke much about what they found, but he had nightmares until the day he died. Said the bodies weren't right, said some were missing entirely and others looked like they'd been— He trailed off. Been what? I demanded. Hollowed out, he whispered, like something had worn them, used them up, and discarded them. And the pines, there were no pines there before that winter. By spring, they were everywhere around the settlement, and they've been spreading ever since. He made me promise not to return to the area, not to speak his name to anyone at the park service. Then he hung up. That was yesterday. Today, I woke to find pine needles scattered across my bedroom floor. My windows were still locked. My doors secure. There was no way they could have gotten in. And Rusty. God, Rusty. He won't stop staring at the corners of the ceiling, growling at shadows I can't see. Sometimes he looks at me with such fear in his eyes that I wonder if he sees something in me that's changed. I've started hearing the whispering at night, soft voices calling my name from just outside my window, from inside my closet, from under my bed. They're getting closer. The pines are spreading. I'm leaving town tomorrow, driving as far away as I can. But I'm not sure it will matter. I think they'll follow me wherever I go now, because the pines know my name, and once they know your name, you belong to them. My name is Robert Johnson, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the most remote part of Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota, where the Badlands stretch into endless formations of eroded buttes and painted canyons. I'd been planning this solo backpacking trip for months. After my divorce, I needed something to clear my head, to remind myself who I was when I wasn't trying to salvage a relationship that had been dead long before we signed the papers. I'd researched the park thoroughly. The south unit near Medora was too populated for what I needed. The north unit offered more solitude, but I was after something even more remote. The park rangers warned me about the Achenbach Trail. 6 miles of the most rugged terrain in the park, they said. Make sure you bring enough water. Cell service is non-existent out there. Perfect. The Badlands in early October were breathtaking. Rust-colored buttes rising against impossibly blue skies. The Little Missouri River winding through valleys where bison grazed. I parked at the Juniper Campground trailhead, double-checked my supplies, and set off along the Achenbach. The air was crisp, hinting at the coming winter, but the sun still offered enough warmth to make the hike pleasant. The first day went exactly as planned. I covered about 7 miles before setting up camp on a small plateau overlooking the river. As the sun set, the formations around me cast long, twisted shadows that seemed to crawl across the ground. I didn't mind. The solitude was exactly what I needed. Just me, my thoughts, and the vast wilderness stretching in every direction. That night, I built a small fire, heated up some freeze-dried chili, and settled in with a flask of whiskey. The stars came out, more than I'd ever seen in my life. No light pollution, no distractions, just the infinite cosmos above and the wind whispering through the junipers around my campsite. It was the whispering that first caught my attention. At first, I thought it was just the wind, a natural phenomenon as air moved through the bizarre rock formations. But as I sat there, taking small sips of whiskey and staring into the flames, I realized the sound had a pattern to it. Almost like words, but just beyond comprehension. I turned off my headlamp to listen more carefully. Come. See. I jolted upright, spilling whiskey on my pants. That was definitely not the wind. I fumbled for my flashlight and swept the beam around my campsite. Nothing. Just juniper trees and rock formations, their shadows dancing in the firelight. "You're being ridiculous," I said aloud, my voice sounding small against the vastness. "It's just the wind." I finished my drink quickly and crawled into my tent, zipping the sleeping bag up to my chin despite the mild temperature. Sleep came eventually, though fitfully. I dreamed of walking through the Badlands, but the landscape had changed. The formations weren't just rock anymore. They had faces pressed into them, mouths opening and closing silently. In the dream, I kept walking, unable to stop, as the faces grew more distinct, their features twisted in expressions of agony. I woke with a start to the sound of something scratching against my tent. My heart hammered in my chest as I fumbled for my flashlight. When I finally got it on, the scratching stopped. I called out, thinking perhaps it was a small animal, a raccoon or fox. No response. Unzipping the tent with shaking hands, I poked my head out. The fire had died to embers, casting a dim, red glow over my campsite. My backpack, which I'd hung from a tree branch to keep away from animals, was still there. Nothing seemed disturbed, but the whispering had returned, louder now. "Robert, come see us." I swung my flashlight wildly, the beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing, and then, a flash of movement at the edge of my vision. I spun, pointing the light toward a cluster of junipers about 50 yards from my tent. 2 eyes reflected back at me, luminous yellow-green. Not animal eyes, too high off the ground. Person-sized, but the wrong color, the wrong shape. They blinked once, and then they were gone. I spent the remainder of the night huddled in my sleeping bag, knife in one hand, flashlight in the other. The whispering continued, sometimes fading to near silence, sometimes growing loud enough that I could almost make out words. By the time dawn broke, I was exhausted, strung out on adrenaline and fear. In the clear light of morning, I told myself I'd overreacted. Perhaps I'd heard a great horned owl. They were common in the area, and their calls could sound almost human. The eyes could have been a deer or elk. The scratching, some small nocturnal creature investigating my tent. I decided to continue my hike as planned, heading deeper into the park along the Achenbach Trail. The day's hike took me through increasingly rugged terrain. The trail descended into a narrow ravine before climbing steeply up the other side. By midday, I'd reached a viewpoint called Sperati Point, offering panoramic views of the Little Missouri River Valley. I sat on a rock outcropping to eat lunch, consulting my map for the route ahead. That's when I noticed the figure. About half a mile back on the trail I'd just traversed stood a person. Even from this distance, something seemed off about their proportions. Arms too long, posture too rigid. I raised my hand to wave, thinking it might be another hiker. The figure didn't move. I fumbled for my binoculars, but by the time I'd focused them, the figure was gone. I scanned the trail, the surrounding bushes, the rocky outcroppings. Nothing. No movement at all except for the occasional bird. A chill ran down my spine despite the warm sun. I packed up quickly and continued along the trail, now checking behind me every few minutes. The terrain grew more challenging, the path narrowing as it wound between towering formations of eroded sandstone. By late afternoon, I reached a section of trail that followed a dry creek bed. The high walls on either side created an echo chamber, and I found myself jumping at every sound. The crunch of my boots on gravel, the rustle of my backpack, my own breathing. That's when I heard it. A clear, unmistakable voice. "Robert, stop running." I froze. The voice had come from directly behind me, so close I could feel the breath on my neck. I spun around, hiking poles raised defensively. No one was there. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking. "This isn't funny." Only my echo answered me, bouncing off the canyon walls. I continued walking, faster now, my eyes constantly scanning the path ahead and behind. The sun was getting low, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me like grasping hands. I needed to make camp soon, but the thought of spending another night out here made my skin crawl. I rounded a bend in the creek bed and stopped short. The trail ahead was blocked, not by a natural obstruction but by a carefully arranged pile of rocks. A cairn, but unlike any I'd seen before. This one was massive, nearly 6 feet tall, and the rocks were balanced in impossible ways, defying gravity. At the top was a deer skull, bleached white by the sun, its empty eye sockets seeming to stare directly at me. I checked my map. There was no mention of such a landmark. I looked for a way around, but the canyon walls were too steep to climb. Going back wasn't an option, not with the feeling of being watched, followed. As I stood there, trying to decide what to do, I noticed something carved into the base of the cairn. I approached cautiously, leaning in to read the crude letters etched into the stone. "Wendell Krantz welcomes you home. Robert." My blood turned to ice. Wendell Krantz. A name I hadn't thought about in years, decades, even. My childhood friend who had disappeared during a family camping trip in Yellowstone when we were 12. They never found him. The search had gone on for weeks, becoming national news, but eventually they'd declared him dead, presumed drowned in the Gardner River. How could anyone out here know about Wendell? Know about my connection to him? I backed away from the cairn, nearly tripping over my own feet. As I did, a gust of wind blew through the canyon, carrying with it that same whispering I'd heard the night before. But now, the words were clearer. "You left me there, Robert. You said you'd come back." The voice was Wendell's, exactly as I remembered it from childhood, but with an unnatural hollowness that made my skin crawl. "That's impossible," I said aloud. "You're not real." The whispering stopped abruptly. Then, from directly overhead, came a sound that turned my blood to ice, the wet, heavy sound of something large moving across the rock. I looked up. Clinging to the canyon wall, about 15 feet above me, was a figure. It might have once been human, but now it was something else entirely. Its limbs were too long, bent at impossible angles like a spider's. Its skin was gray and mottled, stretched tight over a skeletal frame. And its face. God, its face. It still had Wendell's features, but distorted. The mouth stretched into a grin that was too wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "I've been waiting for you, Robert," it said in that horrible, hollow voice. 22 years, but time moves differently for me now." I ran. Blind panic propelled me forward, scrambling over the cairn, rocks tumbling around me. Behind me, I heard a sound like wet meat slapping against stone as the thing moved along the canyon wall in pursuit. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The trail widened ahead, opening into a broader valley. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but terror kept me moving. Night was falling rapidly now, the last of the sunlight fading from the highest buttes. In the gathering darkness, I spotted a small cabin ahead, a Park Service emergency shelter, not marked on my map, but a godsend nonetheless. I sprinted toward it, fumbling with the simple latch on the door. Behind me, I could hear that wet, slithering sound getting closer. I burst through the door, slammed it shut, and dropped the wooden bar across it. The cabin was small, a single room with a wood stove, a rough-hewn table, and a cot in the corner. No electricity, no running water, but right now it was the safest place in the world. Or so I thought. As my breathing slowed, I became aware of a foul odor permeating the cabin, like rotting meat and stagnant water. My flashlight revealed the source. The cot in the corner wasn't empty. A park ranger lay there, or what remained of one. His uniform was still recognizable, though the body inside it had been changed. The limbs were twisted and elongated, the torso hollowed out. His face was frozen in an expression of pure terror, mouth stretched impossibly wide as if his final scream had physically distorted his features. Pinned to his chest was a Park Service badge, Ranger Matthew Daniels. I stumbled backward, retching. As I did, I noticed something scratched into the wooden floor beside the cot. It looked fresh, the splinters still light-colored against the dark wood. "He wasn't enough. I need you, Robert." A sound from outside caught my attention. Not the wet slithering of before, but footsteps. Human footsteps, approaching the cabin. A voice called out, "Hello? Is someone in there? I saw your light." It sounded normal, concerned, human, but then I noticed something seeping under the door, a dark, viscous fluid that smelled of rot and stagnant water. "Please," the voice called again. "I'm lost. I need help." The liquid continued to spread across the floor, moving against gravity, flowing upward along the walls. Where it touched, the wood began to warp and twist. "Robert," the voice changed, becoming that hollow, inhuman whisper. "Let me in, like you promised all those years ago." The memories came flooding back then, memories I'd suppressed for 2 decades. Wendell and I, 12 years old, exploring the woods near Gardner River, finding the cave that wasn't on any park map, the strange symbols carved into the rock around the entrance. Wendell wanted to go in. I was afraid. "I'll wait here," I told him. "I'll keep watch." "Promise you'll come if I call," he'd said. "I promise." He'd gone in with just a small flashlight. I'd waited, growing increasingly anxious as minutes turned to an hour. Then I'd heard his scream, a sound of pure terror that still haunted my nightmares. But I hadn't gone in. I'd run. Back to the campsite, back to the adults. I told them Wendell had fallen into the river. I'd led the search parties in the wrong direction. I'd lied about everything. And now, whatever had taken Wendell had found me. The fluid was halfway up the walls now, the wood warping into shapes that looked disturbingly like faces. The door bulged inward as something heavy pressed against it. I scrambled to the small window on the opposite wall. It was stuck, the frame swollen with age. Using my hiking poles, I smashed the glass, ignoring the cuts on my hands as I cleared the frame and squeezed through. Outside, the night was pitch black. No moon, no stars, as if the sky itself had been swallowed by whatever was hunting me. I ran blindly, using my flashlight to avoid the worst obstacles. Behind me, I heard the cabin collapse with a sound like breaking bones. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing in a small grove of junipers. My flashlight batteries were dying, the beam growing weaker by the minute. In the fading light, I checked my GPS unit. It was glitching, the screen showing me in a different location every few seconds, none of them making sense. As the last of my flashlight's beam faded, I heard the whispering again, not just from one direction, but from all around me. The junipers themselves seemed to be speaking, their gnarled branches creaking as they bent toward me. "You promised, Robert." The ground beneath me was growing wet with that same viscous fluid. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't respond. The fluid was climbing up my body now, cold and heavy. Where it touched, my skin began to stretch and distort. In the absolute darkness, I felt a presence leaning close. The smell of rot was overwhelming. Something cold and wet pressed against my ear, whispering in Wendell's voice, but not Wendell's voice. Something ancient that had been wearing his identity like a poorly fitting mask. "Now you'll keep your promise. Now you'll come with me, and we'll both go home." I felt my bones beginning to crack and reshape themselves, my skin stretching, my insides hollowing out. The pain was beyond anything I could have imagined. I tried to scream, but my mouth was already changing, stretching too wide, my teeth sharpening into needles. In my last moments of humanity, I understood the truth. There had never been a Wendell Krantz in the traditional sense. That name, that identity, had been bait in a trap set long ago. The thing in the cave had been ancient when the first humans arrived in this land. It had worn many faces over the centuries, lured many victims, and now it would wear mine. As consciousness faded, I heard the wet, slithering sound retreating into the Badlands. 2 figures moving together now, back toward the hidden places where the rocks have faces and time moves differently. I'm still here, in a sense. Sometimes I'm aware enough to understand what I've become. Those are the worst times. The thing that wears my skin sometimes lets me surface, lets me remember, lets me feel the guilt and horror of what we do to the lost hikers we find. If you're reading this, it means someone found the journal I managed to hide at the ranger station during one of my moments of lucidity. It means there's a record of what happened to Robert Johnson in the Badlands of North Dakota. Stay away from the Achenbach Trail. Stay away from the whispering. If you hear someone calling for help in the night, ignore it. Whatever you do, don't make promises to strangers. Some promises follow you forever, and if you see two figures watching you from distant ridges, one tall and spindly, one shorter with familiar human proportions, run. Run as fast as you can and don't look back, because Robert Johnson is still out there, and he's not alone.